oversleeping and didn't complain as she helped her get ready. Of course, there was one morning Anne would never dare to sleep in, Friday mornings, when they had potions. But even so, she nearly messed up her first potions class after the break. Her body clock was still completely out of sync, and in a half-asleep daze, she accidentally pulled out her herbology textbook during class. The moment she opened it, Snape's expression turned so cold it felt like the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. Realizing her mistake, Anne scrambled to switch the books in record time and then calmly answered several of Snape's most difficult questions with a composed face, as if nothing had happened. After class, Fanny rushed over, still shaken. "You scared me to death. I thought Professor Snape was going to toss you into the lake to wake you up. I swear, you must be the first student in Hogwarts history to pull out the wrong subject's textbook in his class, and survive it." Anne clutched her chest and replied with lingering fear, "Honestly, if I hadn't answered those tricky questions right, I probably would be swimming in the lake right now. Thank goodness I actually studied over the holidays." Though privately, she added to herself, "Thank that one overly curious academic on the train and all those endless questions during the break." After this near-death experience, Anne managed to fix her sleep schedule for about a week. After that, well, at least she stayed awake on Fridays. In January, all of Hogwarts was abuzz about one particular event, the Gryffindor vs Hufflepuff Quidditch match. It was a crucial game for Gryffindor. If they beat Hufflepuff, they'd top the House Cup standings and finally break Slytherin's 7-year winning streak. But the bigger controversy was the referee, Professor Snape. The entire school was whispering that Snape would never let Gryffindor win. Anne couldn't care less about any of that. Still, when the match day came, Fanny dragged her to the pitch. "Come on, Anne. It might be an exciting match. And I'm really curious to see if our head of house will be biased toward Hufflepuff." Anne knew full well that girls their age preferred to do things in groups, and since Fanny always brought her breakfast and helped her get to class, she went along. The stands were packed. Students from Hufflepuff, Gryffindor, and Slytherin shouted themselves hoarse for their respective teams. Anne sat down, already feeling her eardrums throb from the noise. She and Fanny had to practically shout at each other to be heard. "Fanny!" Anne yelled. "Isn't it weird? I haven't seen Malfoy today." She had scanned the entire Slytherin stand without spotting him. With a frown, she wondered, surely he didn't sneak off to lose house points again? Fanny pointed toward the Gryffindor stand and looked over and saw Malfoy and his cronies confronting Ron and Neville. "Yep, sounds about right." Then her eyes moved to the teacher's stand. "Wait, why is Dumbledore here too?" Anne spotted the familiar silver beard and twinkling eyes. "Is Quirrell up to something again?" No, don't get involved. Not my business." Barely a minute into the match, Snape awarded Hufflepuff a penalty, which they scored. A wave of booing erupted through the stadium. Anne looked at Snape and couldn't help thinking, no wonder people think you're the villain, Professor. You're really making it hard to root for you. 2 minutes later, another penalty to Hufflepuff. Now even the usually calm Gryffindors were yelling in frustration. Anne glanced over and saw Ron, Neville, and Malfoy in a full-on scuffle in the stands. On the pitch, Harry had spotted the golden snitch and was diving after it with everything he had. Before Hufflepuff's seeker could react, Harry snatched it right out of the air. The game was over. The stadium exploded with cheers. No one could remember a match ending that fast. The Gryffindor section roared with excitement, their voices flooding the entire pitch. Even some Slytherins stood to applaud. Strength and skill were always respected. Anne was thrilled. A short match? Perfect. Fanny was just as pleased. She always admired people with real talent. Later that evening, at dinner, Anne noticed Malfoy and his followers at the Slytherin table, bruised and swollen, clearly worse for wear. Curious, she leaned toward Fanny. "So, Malfoy got into a fight with the Gryffindor boys this morning? He looks awful. You know about that? Yeah. I saw it through the telescope. He was wrestling with Ron and Neville. Fanny rolled her eyes. Well, he claimed it was the other way around, that he beat them both up while they ganged up on him. Anne shrugged and said nothing. She simply dropped the bronze nut she'd been flipping back into her robe pocket and picked up a plate of tender steak. Sigh. I really miss the foods I had over Christmas. White rice, scrambled eggs with tomato, spicy pork stir-fry, braised fish, beef stew with potatoes, eggplant with garlic sauce, bean sprout stir-fry, shredded potatoes with vinegar, tofu. Wait, Anne, what are you even talking about? Fanny blinked. I understood the part about eating at a restaurant, but everything after that sounded like gibberish. Anne popped a piece of beef into her mouth and mumbled, just names of some dishes that I loved. Fanny laughed. Well, no wonder I didn't get it. I've eaten at a restaurant you mentioned before, some dishes were nice, but some were not my taste. Oh? What do you like? I like those little pastries. The snacks? Oh, you mean dim sum, a breakfast tea. Dim what? Never mind. It's one of the 8 major cuisines in the food that I love, and part of the breakfast tradition. How was she supposed to explain this in English without revealing how much she knew? Wow, there are that many types of food. Fanny tilted her head. But Anne, you really seem interested in the East. You're always reading about Eastern wizardry in the library. Haha, maybe it's the mystery of it all. Anyway, let's eat, we still have homework to finish. True. The East is very mysterious. Fanny returned to slowly cutting into her pork chop. A week later, Anne and Fanny went to the library. After settling down at one of the tables, Anne got up alone to look for reference books. As she browsed the magical creatures section, she suddenly caught sight of someone, hard not to, really. The man took up the entire narrow aisle. It was Hagrid. He was trying to hide a book behind his back, but there was no room for it. He gave Anne a nervous smile. Anne glanced at the title, Breeds of British and Irish Dragons and From Egg to Inferno. Why would Hagrid borrow books like these? She wondered, but didn't ask. She just nodded politely and walked past him toward the next shelf, plants. While she was scanning for the book she needed, someone suddenly called out, "Hey, Anne!" She turned her head. Of course. It was Ron Weasley, the most impulsive member of the trio. Nothing good ever happened when he showed up. Anne gave him a polite nod. "Hello, Ron," and tried to leave. But Ron stepped right in her path. "You saw Hagrid earlier, right? That huge guy from the first day of school? What kind of books did he check out?" Anne frowned slightly and tried stepping to the left. Ron mirrored her movement. He was staring at her, waiting for an answer. "I didn't see him," Anne lied. "But I saw you standing near the magical creatures section, and he was right there," Ron said immediately. "Fine," Anne said, starting to lose patience. "He checked out 2 books about dragons. I didn't ask him why. Satisfied, Mr. Weasley? Can I go now?" Ron stepped aside. As she walked away, he muttered to himself, "Dragon books? What would Hagrid want with those? I need to tell Harry and Hermione." He returned to the table and blurted out, "I ran into Anne while checking on Hagrid's books." "Anne?" Hermione looked up. "Yeah, I asked her what Hagrid borrowed. She lied at first, saying she didn't see him. But I told her I saw her stop by the magical creatures shelf while he was there. So she finally admitted it." "She probably got mad," Hermione interrupted. Ron blinked. "Yeah. I don't know why though. She said he borrowed books about dragons." "Dragons? What is Hagrid thinking?" "Hagrid's always wanted a dragon," Harry said. He told me that the first time we met. Hermione asked, "What exactly did you do, Ron?" "When you asked Anne." "I didn't do anything. I just stood there and waited for her answer." Then he quickly turned the topic back. "But keeping dragons is illegal. The 1709 Wizarding Convention banned dragon ownership. They're dangerous and nearly impossible to tame. You should see my brother Charlie, he's got burns all over from dealing with wild dragons in Romania." "Then what's Hagrid planning?" Harry asked. Hermione wasn't listening. She was glancing around the library, searching for Anne, but couldn't spot her. Before long, the two boys dragged her off to go snoop around Hagrid's hut. A/N, sigh. Sometimes there's just no reasoning with people who lack emotional intelligence. Shrugs. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 18, The Dragon. After Ron finished interrogating her, Anne excused herself to Fanny and went straight to Professor Sprout's greenhouse. She wanted to stay as far away from the Golden Trio as possible. Even though she was very curious about the dragon, who hadn't heard stories about dragons as a child, she forced herself to let it go. She had thought dragons wouldn't appear until the Triwizard Tournament in 4th year. But now, with an actual dragon lead dangling in front of her, how could she not be tempted? Still, she reminded herself what getting too involved with the main characters could lead to: danger, misadventures, or even ending up as a prime target for the Dark Lord. No thanks. Best to squash her curiosity now. By dinner, Anne had safely returned to the Slytherin table and finally exhaled in relief. But she still felt uneasy under the frequent, fleeting gazes from 3 people over at the Gryffindor table. The next day passed. Nothing happened. 2 days. Still nothing. 3 days. Absolutely nothing. 4 days went by. Again, nothing, except that every time she sat at the Slytherin table, she could feel those 3 pairs of eyes on her, whispering behind her back. After a while, it started gnawing at her like a kitten scratching at the door of her brain. Her thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. One voice said, "What if Hagrid really has a dragon? That would be incredible. What kind? What does it look like? Does it breathe fire? Was it hatched from an egg? What do dragon eggs even look like?" Another voice warned, "You shouldn't get mixed up with the main characters. You're a side character. Ordinary. You don't have plot armor. Don't be stupid. Don't die trying to act interesting." And yet another voice reasoned, "Come on, relax a little. You've been in the magical world for a while now. You've learned quite a lot. What real danger could happen in the first year? The scariest thing is facing Quirrell and you know who at the end, and the protections around the stone. Just don't go near it. But a dragon? Maybe even a baby one? Or a dragon egg? How many chances like that will you ever get?" All 3 voices tangled in her head, driving her mad. On the 5th day, that afternoon, Slytherin had no classes. Anne was helping Professor Sprout organize herbs in Greenhouse 2. In Greenhouse 1, Gryffindor and Ravenclaw were having herbology together. Just as the bell rang, 2 people grabbed Anne by the arms and dragged her out of the greenhouse. They ran so fast that Anne didn't even have time to react. By the time she realized what was happening, they'd already pulled her quite a distance. It was, of course, Harry and Ron. "Put me down. I can run on my own," Anne shouted, angry. "What are you 2 doing?" Harry and Ron exchanged glances, and ran faster. Once they were far enough from the greenhouses, they finally let her go. Anne was fuming and nearly reached for her wand. Thankfully, Hermione quickly stepped in. "Anne, please don't be mad. I know we shouldn't have dragged you like that, but this is really important. And it's about you, too." Harry and Ron nodded rapidly. Anne took a deep breath, calming herself, though her tone was still cold. Fine. What is it? We don't have time to explain now. We need to get somewhere first. Hermione said hastily. Where to? Hagrid's hut. The four of them arrived at Hagrid's cottage. When Hagrid let them in, Anne's eyes immediately locked on the table in the center of the messy room. On it was an egg, cracked down the middle. She couldn't help stepping closer, her gaze fixed on it. See? Ron said smugly. Told you she'd be interested in a dragon. No one isn't interested in dragons. Hermione elbowed him in the ribs. Anne ignored Ron and asked Hagrid, who was also staring at the egg, it's about to hatch, isn't it? Hagrid nodded heavily. The egg made a faint crackling noise. The room went silent. 5 people held their breath and watched. Then came a sharp scratching sound, the egg cracked open. A small dragon flopped out, awkward and wrinkled like a black umbrella. Its wings were lined with tiny spikes and disproportionately large compared to its body. A big snout, knobby horns on its head, and bulging orange-red eyes gave it a fierce look. It sneezed, and a few sparks flew from its nostrils. Hagrid reached out and gently patted its head. "Ain't it beautiful?" he said. The baby dragon opened its mouth to show a row of sharp teeth. "Merlin's beard!" Hagrid exclaimed. "It knows I'm its mum." Anne crossed her arms. "I don't think that's a mum recognition reaction. More like feed me." Hagrid nodded thoughtfully and turned to find something for the baby dragon to eat. Anne looked at the trio. "Okay. Now, who wants to explain why you dragged me here?" They looked at each other, no one speaking. Anne raised an eyebrow. Right then, Hagrid gasped and ran to the window. "Someone's out there! A boy! I saw a boy spying just now," he ran off. Harry rushed over to the window and shouted, "It was Malfoy!" Anne couldn't stop the massive eye roll. "God! Of course it was!" Hagrid hastily stuffed the baby dragon into a wooden box he'd prepared days earlier. Ron and Harry bolted to the door like they were going to chase Malfoy, while Hermione leaned against the window. Anne looked around and felt like she was watching a bunch of panicking children. Well, they were children. And they had made a mistake. As for Hagrid, well, mentally, he was a child. Harry and Ron returned moments later, out of breath. They couldn't catch Malfoy. Hagrid tucked the box high up on a shelf in the corner, like that would actually keep it hidden. Hermione turned to Anne, who was still calmly standing in place. "All right. Everyone calm down." Anne's voice rang out, steady and clear. "This has already happened. Malfoy won't report it immediately. You can't undo what's done. So the only thing to do now is figure out how to handle it." "Why? What should we do? What about the dragon?" "Anne." 4 voices. All eyes on her. At that moment, Anne thought of a senior colleague from her past life in investment banking, always calm in a crisis. When something goes wrong, the first thing you do is calm down. Then break the problem into pieces. That's how you solve it best. She spoke again, cool and composed. "Malfoy won't run straight to the professors, he doesn't have any solid evidence." "But he saw it!" Ron burst out. Anne gave him a flat look. "Yes, he saw it. But so what? He runs to a professor and says, 'I saw a dragon in Hagrid's hut.' Do you think any of them will believe that?" Finally, someone's brain switched on. "Right. Dragons haven't been seen in years. No one's going to believe a first-year student," Hermione said, nodding seriously. "But what if Snape believes him?" Harry interjected. "He's always trying to catch me doing something wrong." Anne turned her gaze on Harry and spoke quickly. "I don't know why you hate Professor Snape so much. But even if he believes you, let's say a first year tells you that the person they hate most and Hagrid are secretly raising a dragon. Would you just run over and search the hut? And if there's nothing there? How would you explain to the headmaster that you stormed into someone's home because of a student's word? Harry, please, use your brain. Harry was momentarily stunned into silence. Anne glanced around the room and then checked her watch. Her voice was even, her tone steady, her words measured. Now, Harry, Ron, Hermione, you three need to get back to herbology. You're already very late, and even Professor Sprout can lose her temper eventually. She turned to Hagrid. As for your dragon, don't worry for now. Nothing's going to happen yet. You can take it out of the box and feed it something. We'll come back here after class to discuss what to do next. All right. The three of them exchanged glances and nodded. As Anne stepped out of Hagrid's hut, a bitter winter wind howled past. She sighed deeply. What a terrible day. Why did I let myself get pulled into this? As the trio ran past her, both Harry and Ron gave her complicated looks. Hermione, on the other hand, beamed and said cheerfully, Anne, you're amazing. To which Anne could only scream internally. I don't want to be amazing. That's a dragon. A/N, I rewrote the final scene multiple times, especially Anne's dialogue controlling the situation. Balancing tone and pacing made a big difference. It's a useful writing skill, so take notes. That said, I was a little conflicted while writing this chapter. Is it too soon to reveal more of Anne's true personality? Ha ha ha. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 19, Discussion. When Hermione, Ron, and Harry finally made it through herbology class, hearts pounding the entire time, they rushed straight to Hagrid's hut the moment class ended. As they pushed open the wooden door, they froze. Anne was curled up in a large, fur-covered armchair by Hagrid's fireplace, knees tucked up, head lowered. A silver sickle spun nimbly in her fingers, occasionally tossed in the air and caught again. Already petite, she looked even smaller wrapped in her black wizard robes, especially nestled in Hagrid's oversized chair. The firelight flickered across half her face. Hagrid stood at the table in the middle of the room, bent over an open wooden box, coaxing the baby dragon to eat. The room was silent. Anne lifted her head only when she felt the cold wind from the open door. She swung her legs down, still idly spinning the sickle in one hand, shifted to sit upright, and gave the trio a polite smile. You're here. Sit down, please, and shut the door, it's chilly outside. Hagrid. Hagrid finally looked away from the dragon and gave the trio a nod, then carried the baby dragon toward the center of the room and squatted to feed it. Ron, bringing up the rear, closed the door. Hermione and Harry sat in the only two chairs, while Ron looked around awkwardly and chose to sit on a wooden crate. Once everyone was settled, all eyes turned to Anne. She flicked the sickle into her palm and glanced at her watch before speaking slowly. Let's set a few ground rules for this talk, so we don't waste time arguing. I'd like to get back to the castle for dinner. First, thanks to you three, I'm now officially in the same boat as you, at least when it comes to this dragon. So, for now, don't think of me as just a Slytherin, and don't bring up house affiliations during this conversation. Second, I know now that you've calmed down, you probably have a lot of questions. Let's ask them one at a time, raise your hand if you have to. No shouting over each other. Keep calm. Any objections to these rules? Anne asked. Everyone shook their heads. Anne nodded back. Good. Let's begin. I'll ask first, just how serious is it to be raising a dragon? Harry and Hermione immediately turned to Ron. Ron, you explain. Ron cleared his throat. Keeping a dragon is illegal. The Ministry passed a law back in 1709 at the International Confederation of Wizards. It's strictly forbidden. Dragons are dangerous and nearly impossible to train. My brother Charlie works with dragons in Romania. So yeah, keeping one is a big deal. Got it. Now, your question. Anne asked. I want to know, what should we actually do with the dragon? Hagrid cut in, it's Norbert. I gave him a name. Anne glanced at Hagrid, tone mildly exasperated. Hagrid, remember the rules? Ron, go on. We have to get rid of Norbert. He can't stay here, Ron said firmly. Hagrid glared but said nothing. Anne nodded. Does anyone disagree with Ron? Because I agree. Norbert really shouldn't stay here. Hermione and Harry exchanged a look. I agree, they both said. Hagrid raised his hand. Anne gave him a nod. With tears in his eyes, Hagrid hugged the box holding Norbert. But where could we send him? He's just a baby, he only just hatched. He might die. Harry raised his hand. Harry, go ahead, Anne said. Charlie. Ron's brother Charlie is working with dragons in Romania. Maybe he could take Norbert. Anne, Hermione, and Ron all lit up. Great idea. Harry, you're brilliant. Hermione and Ron said in unison. Anne turned to Hagrid. What do you think, Hagrid? I bet Charlie would be more than happy to take Norbert and care for him properly. I'll write to Charlie right away. Ron added excitedly. I should get a reply in 2 days. Hagrid looked down at Norbert with a hint of sadness, but nodded. All right, one problem solved, Anne said with some relief. Now, next issue, who's got one? Hermione raised her hand. Anne nodded. Go ahead. What about Malfoy? Sure, maybe none of the professors would believe him, but what if he spreads rumors? What if he tells Dumbledore? What do we do if we run into him later? And you, Anne, what if he uses this to threaten you? He'll probably badmouth you in Slytherin too. All eyes turned to Anne. Yet. Thanks to you three dragging me into this. Anne muttered with some irritation. The trio looked sheepishly at one another. But, Anne stood, slipping the sickle into her robe pocket, this one's actually the easiest to handle. The others stared in confusion. We pretend none of this ever happened. I wasn't here. You weren't here. No dragon. Nothing. But, we were here. Ron said, confused. Hermione's eyes lit up, she got it. I see. You mean, since only the 5 of us and Malfoy know what happened, and no one else saw anything, as long as we don't talk about it, it'll be like it never happened. Anne nodded. But what if Malfoy does tell people? Harry asked. Anne gave a mischievous smile. Then it gets even better. Just admit it. Tell them yes, we were totally in Hagrid's hut with a huge dragon, one with 3 wings. And Malfoy just happened to be lurking nearby and saw it. I mean, I'm a Slytherin, right? And he hates me. What better rumor for him to spread? Harry's eyes widened as he imagined the scene. Ha! No one would believe him. They'll just think he made it up to get us in trouble. Only Ron and Hagrid still looked confused. Exactly. Anne walked to the door and checked the time. It's getting late. I'm going to dinner. You lot should stay here for a while. Gryffindors and Slytherins can't be seen together too often. And one more thing, next time you drag me into something like this, I will draw my wand. She pulled up her hood, tucked her hands into her sleeves, and slipped out the door. Hermione watched her leave and turned to Harry with a grin. She's something else, isn't she? Harry nodded. She's brilliant. Ron still looked dazed. Hagrid just sat quietly feeding Norbert. Anne jogged all the way to the dining hall, caught her breath, adjusted her robes, and stepped inside. As usual, she sat beside Fanny. But the moment she entered, she noticed Malfoy watching her with that smug, scheming look. She ignored him, grabbed a custard tart, and ate it in 2 bites. Then she nudged Fanny with her chin. "What's with Malfoy? He's been staring since I walked in." Fanny took a sip of milk tea, then glanced at Malfoy. "He's been going on all afternoon about some big secret he uncovered." "Oh," Anne said as she helped herself to a plate of perfectly roasted, boneless chicken. "Nice. This is good." Just as she was about to go grab some pudding, Malfoy marched over with his 2 sidekicks. Everyone near her quickly scooted away. Anne didn't even glance at him. She stood up, reaching for the pudding. Malfoy blocked her with a hand. Anne frowned. "Hello, Mr. Malfoy. I see you. May I get my pudding, please? I'm starving." Now everyone at the Slytherin table was watching. Even a few nearby tables were paying attention. Malfoy, clearly enjoying the attention, raised his voice. "Humph. Anne Reeve. Don't think I don't know. I've uncovered your biggest secret, and once it's out, you'll be expelled for sure." Now everyone in the hall turned to look. Fanny stood beside Anne, food forgotten. Anne sighed. "Malfoy, I'm not in the mood for your games. I'm just hungry." Fanny added, "Draco, what are you doing?" Malfoy ignored her, staring only at Anne. "I'm going to expose your secret. Don't blame me when the school kicks you out." Fanny opened her mouth, but Anne tugged her sleeve. The hall fell silent. Anne looked around, annoyed. "All right then. Let's hear it. What's this huge secret that's going to get me expelled?" Malfoy puffed up. This afternoon, Anne Reeve was with Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, and Harry Potter in Hagrid's hut, raising a dragon. Gasps and whispers erupted. Anne rubbed her ear. "Malfoy, could you keep it down a bit?" Malfoy sneered. "Too late to regret it now." "Regret what? Your shouting is giving me a headache. By the way, this Hagrid, who is he again?" Someone nearby snorted with laughter. Malfoy gaped. "Don't play dumb. The big oaf in the hut by the Forbidden Forest, the one who met us at the train." "Oh, him. Why were you near the forest?" "We're not supposed to go there." "I wasn't in the forest, it was beside it." "Right, right. And what were you doing there?" "Trying to uncover Harry Potter's secrets and get him expelled." "But you said I had a big secret." "You were there too." "Right, so I was there too." "And then?" "You were raising a dragon with that stinky oaf." "Ooh, a dragon. Cool. What did it look like? Did you get a good look?" "A hideous little black dragon with wings." "Little? That's lame. I'd rather have a huge one. Bigger than a hut." "Anne Reeve. Don't deny it. I saw you." "Fine, fine, I confess. I was with the Gryffindor trio, in a hut near the forest, with a giant and a tiny black dragon." "Can I get my pudding now? I've only had 1 chicken leg." Anne sat down, pulled over her pudding, and grabbed a sausage. Malfoy froze. "You're admitting it?" Anne nodded mid-bite. He glanced around, only to realize no one was paying attention anymore. "She admitted it. She said it." He stormed off, flustered, with his cronies behind him. Fanny chewed slowly, then wiped her mouth with a napkin. "That felt like watching you tease a child." Anne sipped her tea. "I'm not here to babysit. I just want to eat in peace." As she left the hall, she passed the trio on their way in. Their eyes met briefly, then went their separate ways. A/N, crisis averted, perfectly. Haha. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25 plus advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon/crimson_lore. Chapter 20, Sending Off the Dragon. When Malfoy reported the dragon incident to Professor Snape, he was met with a cold rebuke. After that, he didn't bring it up again, because he realized no one believed him. Following the scene in the dining hall, most students thought Malfoy had made up a story to smear the people he disliked, especially Anne. Some braver students even began reenacting Malfoy's argument with Anne, tweaking the lines to make them even more ridiculous. Their antics had everyone around them laughing, and soon, Malfoy became a Logan Grieve throughout the school. Now, every time he passed by Anne, he would glare at her fiercely. But Anne didn't mind. A glare didn't actually hurt, and she carried on with her routine like nothing had happened, sleeping in, going to the greenhouses, eating meals. Occasionally, she hoped the whole dragon business would be over soon so she wouldn't have to keep up this ambiguous connection with the Golden Trio. As for sending the dragon away, she wasn't the least bit worried. That was their responsibility, wasn't it? Besides, the chosen one, Harry Potter, already had the invisibility cloak, one of the Deathly Hallows, so what was there to fear? If they still managed to mess this up, Anne would seriously question their intelligence. But reality rarely followed one's expectations. Things were about to deviate significantly, at least, from Anne's expectations. Because besides Anne and the trio, there was another person involved in the matter. 3 days after the incident in the dining hall, on Tuesday at lunch, Anne was happily piling food onto her plate. She was mixing different meats and cutting them into bite-sized pieces, popping one in her mouth with each bite. When Malfoy passed by, he didn't glare at her like usual. Instead, he gave her a sly, knowing smile. Anne's heart skipped a beat. Did he find something out? She thought it through quickly. After getting shut down by Snape, Malfoy wouldn't risk embarrassing himself again unless he had real evidence, like catching them in the act of sending off the dragon. That had to be it. If that was what he was after, then it wasn't too worrying. Harry had the invisibility cloak, no way Malfoy could see them. If anything, Malfoy might end up losing house points himself. And Anne was half right. That afternoon, after class, Anne and Fanny were exiting the classroom when they saw the trio lingering at the bottom of the stairs, chatting while occasionally sneaking glances toward the door. Anne guessed they probably wanted to talk about Malfoy, so she leaned close to Fanny and whispered, "I'm heading to the library. Go ahead without me." Fanny had clearly noticed the trio too. She glanced between Anne and the three, then nodded and left without asking further questions. Anne casually strolled down the stairs, passing the trio without making eye contact, and dropped a low instruction, "Separate and meet in the library." Without waiting for a reaction, she leisurely made her way to the library, tossing a silver sickle up and catching it as she walked. Once in the first floor reading area, she set down her bag, pulled out some books, opened her notebook, and jotted a few lines. By the time the trio arrived at the library door, Anne had already gone upstairs to the second floor, settling between the Quidditch and sports sections where no one else was around. The trio arrived shortly after, a bit out of breath. Clearly, they'd run. They visibly relaxed when they saw her. Anne noticed Ron's hand was heavily bandaged. "All right, my daring trio, what's up? This about Malfoy?" Ron opened his mouth to speak, but Anne stopped him with a wave and looked at Hermione instead. "Let's have Hermione explain. Make it quick. This isn't the best place for a private chat." Hermione had calmed down. She glanced at Ron and began in a hushed, fast-paced voice. "It was my idea to come to you. Ron got a letter from Charlie yesterday morning. He's really happy to take the dragon. But he stressed that no one can know. It's very serious. He said he'll send some friends to pick up the dragon this Saturday night, from the top of the astronomy tower." She then looked at Ron's injured hand. Everything was going fine until Ron got bitten by the dragon yesterday at lunch. "We've been taking turns caring for Norbert. Hagrid still has work to do. At first we thought it wasn't serious, but Ron's hand kept swelling, so we went to Madame Pomfrey. She had him stay overnight in the hospital wing." Anne raised an eyebrow at Ron, who quickly added, I didn't say anything. Just told her I got bitten by a dog. Hermione nodded and continued, but somehow Malfoy found out. He came this morning, pretending he needed to borrow a book from Ron. He wasn't borrowing anything. Ron fumed. He just came to mock me. Hermione shot him a glare and went on. After he mocked Ron, he took the book on Ron's nightstand. And that's the problem, Charlie's letter was tucked inside it. All three turned to look at Anne, waiting for her response. Anne folded her arms and leaned against the bookshelf. So? You're not here just for ideas on how to respond, right? Harry and Ron looked at Hermione, who nodded. We do have a plan. We'll definitely get Norbert out by Saturday, he's growing way too fast. Ron added, and I really don't want to keep taking care of him. Hermione rushed to finish, but I still felt uneasy. That's why I said we should come talk to you. Anne nodded. All right. So what's your plan? Hermione and Ron turned to Harry, who whispered, I have an invisibility cloak. We'll use it to sneak Norbert out. Anne still leaned lazily against the shelf. An invisibility cloak? That's a fine item. Malfoy won't be able to catch you. Perfect. But... The trio tensed. Anne lowered her gaze, thinking. Then there's Filch and that horrible cat of his. You might avoid Malfoy, but Filch and his cat could still catch you. Harry quickly said, I've used the cloak during the Christmas holidays, never got caught. Ron muttered, you mean the time you dragged me out to look at that weird mirror? I'm sure that cat smelled us, Filch just couldn't see us and got lucky. What mirror? Anne asked, but both boys went silent. Hermione looked puzzled. Anne waved it off. Doesn't matter. The point is, someone might still catch you. So you need a backup plan. She tapped her chin. How are your astronomy grades? Hey! Harry and Ron blinked, confused by the sudden change. But they answered honestly, average. Not great. Hermione was ready to lecture them, but Anne stopped her by covering her mouth. She knew Hermione couldn't resist anything school-related. Okay. Do you have astronomy class this week? She asked Hermione, letting go. Yes, Thursday night, Hermione replied, then clamped her mouth shut. Perfect. Anne looked at the boys. On Thursday, during class, make a few small mistakes, nothing serious. Then, on Saturday night when you sneak out, bring your astronomy books. Even better, bring a telescope. That way, if anything goes wrong, you'll have a legitimate reason to be up there. Worst case, it'll save you from getting expelled. With this, your plan should be foolproof. Harry and Ron nodded eagerly. Hermione beamed. I knew we should talk to you. Anne waved a hand. I don't see what's so great about this. Anyway, good luck with your dragon delivery. I'm off. When Anne returned to the Slytherin table, Fanny was just finishing her last sip of pumpkin soup. As Anne sat down, Fanny leaned closer and asked, Did you and your Gryffindor friends do something exciting again? When did I get a group of Gryffindor friends? Anne said, scooping some mashed potatoes. Don't make things up. And we didn't do anything. But if you really want to know, I won't lie, I just can't tell you yet. You'll probably find out by the end of the weekend. Fanny pouted. Fine. But I bet it has something to do with that dragon Malfoy mentioned. Hey? What dragon? Anne feigned confusion. Aha! Fanny leaned in, surprised. You really did raise a dragon in that hut with them. Anne took a big gulp of soup, grinning mysteriously. I didn't say anything. You're the one making guesses. Fanny turned away. Before long, Saturday arrived. That evening in the Slytherin common room, Malfoy strutted over to Anne and Fanny, who were doing homework. He smirked. I know what you're planning to do tonight. Anne paused her quill and looked up blankly. What am I doing? Going to bed. Don't play dumb. You're not sneaking out tonight. It's freezing outside. Why would I go out? Besides, sneaking around the castle at night is serious rule breaking, she said, head down, resuming her writing. They didn't tell you. Malfoy looked at her, searching for a reaction. They? Who? She replied innocently. Forget it. Remembering their past arguments, Malfoy decided not to press further. He just muttered, "You'll see tomorrow," and turned to leave. As he walked away, Anne called after him, "Draco, just a friendly reminder, it's serious rule breaking to be out at night. I'd hate to see Slytherin lose a bunch of points because of you." Malfoy ignored her and stormed out. Fanny nudged Anne, intrigued. Something exciting going on tonight? Anne dipped her quill again. I don't know about exciting, but I do know this homework's due Monday. Fanny glanced at Anne's astronomy assignment and muttered, if you spent less time on herbology, you'd be done by now. The next day, rumors spread through the school. Malfoy had been caught wandering the castle at night, a serious offense. Slytherin lost 20 points. Gryffindor also lost 20, as 4 students were caught stargazing on the astronomy tower late at night, supposedly to improve their grades. All 5 were given detention. When Anne heard the news, she felt a bit sorry about the lost Slytherin points, but also quietly pleased. The whole dragon incident was finally over. And seeing Snape scolding Malfoy in the hallway on her way to the Great Hall only made her day better. She knew now that Malfoy wouldn't dare make any moves for the rest of the term. She could finally enjoy a peaceful, carefree school life again. A/N, another chill daily update. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon/crimson_lore. Chapter 21, Chapter 21, Final Exams. Time marched on at its own pace, unstoppable and unbothered. Slowly, Hogwarts emerged from the cold grip of winter and warmed under the breath of spring. The lake thawed, trees sprouted new buds, and Anne Reeve found herself spending less and less time lingering in bed. A major reason for that shift? Final exams were approaching. Anne's visits to the greenhouse grew rare, and eventually, she avoided it altogether unless necessary. The Slytherin common room was filled with students studying and working on assignments, and the library's tables were packed. As exams drew nearer, it felt like every student in the castle had a string pulled taut inside them. The exam week arrived on a particularly stuffy day in May. Classrooms were even hotter than the air outside. The teachers handed out special quills enchanted with anti-cheating spells. In addition to written exams in subjects like herbology, astronomy, and history of magic, there were also practical tests. Professor Flitwick's Charms exam required students to make a pineapple tap dance across a desk using the levitation charm. Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration test had them turn a mouse into a snuff box. The more detailed, the higher the grade. For potions, Professor Snape asked them to brew a forgetfulness potion from memory. Anne, who'd been quietly anxious about Transfiguration all term, did well. Her mouse-turned snuff box had no tail, no whiskers, nothing of its former self left. She credited half her success to having seen and handled many real snuff boxes in her past life, a good chunk to Erin's coaching over Christmas break, a bit to Fanny's review sessions, and a sliver to Hermione's notes. The last exam was History of Magic. For Anne, whose memory was sharp as ever, it was barely a challenge. Once she was done, she snuck off to the kitchens, grabbed a bucket of ice cream, some tarts, and 2 bottles of iced fruit juice, then sprinted up to the astronomy tower, the highest point in the castle. Anne had discovered during a dull afternoon of sun watching that some areas of Hogwarts remained shaded all afternoon thanks to the taller towers blocking the sun. On hot days, those places were perfect retreats. Sure, the Slytherin common room was cool, but it was too crowded and lacked the breeze. When Anne climbed the astronomy tower, Fanny was already there, waiting. Anne shut the wooden door behind her and cast a locking charm. Then she pulled the bucket of ice cream from her bag and handed it to Fanny. Digging a folded checkered cloth from her bag, she shook it out and laid it on the floor. She placed the tarts and drinks in the center, then flopped down on the cloth, arms behind her head, gazing up at the cloudless sky above Hogwarts. The neighboring tower cast shade over them, shielding them from the harsh sun. "This is perfect," Anne murmured, eyes on the sky. Fanny sat beside her, not lying down like Anne but clearly enjoying herself. She scooped the ice cream slowly and steadily, savoring each bite. When Anne had dragged her up here 2 days ago after the Transfiguration exam, she'd been nervous. But Anne had just pulled out the same cloth, laid it down, and spent a peaceful hour staring at the sky, sighing that it would be better with food. So when she'd been summoned again today, and there was food, Fanny wasn't surprised. She even liked it here. It was breezy, shaded, and far above the stifling lower floors. The early summer wind smelled of grass and flowers, with a touch of lake water. The astronomy tower caught it all, making the spot feel like a cool oasis. After a while, Anne sat up and downed her drink in a few gulps. Her eyes drifted to Fanny's ice cream bucket. With a smirk, Fanny passed it over. "Anne, I've been meaning to tell you, when it comes to food, you're like a bottomless little mouse." Anne took the bucket and pulled out another spoon from her bag. Her cheeks puffed out with ice cream. "I think being a little mouse sounds great." Fanny walked to the tower's edge with a tart and a drink in hand. From there, she could see the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid's hut, and the far-off mountains. Anne joined her, ice cream bucket in hand. She stood on a wooden crate she'd pulled from a dusty corner. "Beautiful view," she said. Fanny nodded, her eyes just peeking above the wall. "I think you need the crate. Full head in the breeze, feels amazing." Fanny fetched a crate too, and together they looked out over Hogwarts, shimmering lakes, dense forests, winding hills, and even the small dots of people near Hagrid's hut. Fanny tugged Anne's sleeve. "Look, Anne. Someone's heading to the hut, 3 of them." Anne squinted at the path. 3 figures. Wait, they looked familiar. "Them again? You mean your Gryffindor friends? What are they doing out there? Does this have to do with the dragon?" "I told you, Fanny, the dragon's long gone. I don't know what they're doing, but whatever it is, I want no part of it. 1 more week and we're home for summer. I'm not getting dragged into any more nonsense." Anne hopped off her crate. "Let's go. Looks like most exams are done. Time to head back." Fanny lingered, craning her neck toward Hagrid's hut like she could sniff out a secret. But Anne was already packing up. "Fanny!" Anne called from the door. All right. But just because you don't go looking for trouble doesn't mean trouble won't find you." As Anne and Fanny walked down a quiet hallway on the way to the Great Hall, 3 people suddenly blocked their path: Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Harry and Hermione stood in front, Ron behind, hemming them in. Harry looked desperate. "Anne, we're in serious trouble." "You?" Anne cut him off, her voice cold. "I don't want to hear it. The last thing is over. I'm done helping. I'm not involved with you anymore." She took a step forward, but they didn't move. Hermione pleaded, "Please, Anne. It's really bad. Professor McGonagall doesn't believe us. And what do you expect me to do? I'm a first-year Slytherin. If a professor won't listen, what makes you think I can do anything?" Her words were fast and sharp. "Now, move. Don't make me draw my wand." Still, they didn't move. Then Ron shouted from behind, "Someone's trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone. He who must not be named might come back. Don't you care?" Fanny trembled. "What? The Philosopher's Stone? Voldemort? That can't be." Anne turned, her voice ice. No, I don't care about the stone. Or whether Voldemort returns. Okay. She pushed forward. Harry snapped, if he comes back, Hogwarts could be destroyed. You can't be this selfish. Anne gave a dry laugh. Congratulations, Mr. Potter. You're right, I am a selfish Slytherin. With that, she took Fanny's hand and walked away. This time, they weren't stopped. Behind them came the whispers. I can't believe her, how could she be like that? I'm sure she has her reasons. What reasons? She's just selfish. And I thought she was my friend. What do we do now? She's right, we have to face this. On the walk to the Great Hall, Fanny and Anne didn't speak. At dinner, Fanny barely touched her food, eyes flicking toward Anne again and again. She ate just one tiny tart before setting down her fork. Finally, Anne snapped. If you have something to say, say it. Stop staring at me. Fanny hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Anne, I just think, maybe you should have heard them out. It sounded serious. Anne softened slightly. She tried to sound calm. So I hear them out, then what? Go running into danger again? I'm a first year. I don't have that kind of strength. I just want a normal life, Fanny. Fanny looked steadily at her. But if it is Voldemort, that's not a small thing. Anne, you should help. If it's Voldemort, then they should tell a professor. That's what they're there for. But they did. The professors didn't believe them. They believe you. Whether you like it or not, Anne, you are their friend. Anne had no response. What could she say? That they were the main characters? That everything would work out in the end anyway? She poked at the meat on her plate. I can't argue with you. But I'm not going. When dinner ended and Anne stood to leave, Fanny followed. She glanced toward the Gryffindor table, frowning. They're not here. Anne said nothing. They made their way to the dungeons. The Slytherin common room was just past Professor Snape's office, and the path included a long, dim staircase. As they descended, they heard faint sobbing. Fanny moved closer to Anne. Anne figured some poor student had been scolded by Snape, nothing unusual. But something about the voice tugged at her memory. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 22, Chapter 22, An Adventure That Couldn't Be Avoided. When Anne reached the bottom of the stairs, someone suddenly burst out from the corridor. The moment the girl saw Anne, she threw her arms around her and began sobbing into her shoulder. Anne nearly stumbled from the impact, instinctively catching the person in her arms. A second later, she realized who it was. Hermione, crying her heart out on Anne's shoulder. Anne froze, unsure what to say. She'd never been good at comforting people who were crying. With helpless eyes, she glanced at Fanny, silently begging for help. Fanny mouthed some words without making a sound, "Comfort her." Anne thought for a moment and did her best to follow the advice. She gently patted Hermione's back and said softly, "It's okay now. Can you tell me what happened?" Hermione gradually calmed down, her sobs turning to hiccups. She choked out, "We suspect that Professor Snape is going to steal the Philosopher's Stone. So Harry asked me to keep an eye on him. But he caught me just now, and I don't know where he's gone. We already tried telling Professor McGonagall, but she didn't believe us. Anne, I'm scared." There. I understand," Anne said, still unsure how to respond. She couldn't bring herself to say something harsh at a time like this. Fanny noticed Anne's hesitation and spoke up, "Anne, I think you should help them." Anne opened her mouth to explain. But Fanny cut her off, her tone serious. "If you won't help them, then I definitely will." I believe this is the right thing to do. Anne was stunned. How had she ended up being cornered by two kids? With a sigh of resignation, she muttered, "Fine, fine. I'll go." Hermione lifted her tear-streaked face, eyes wide. "Anne, will you really help us?" Anne pulled a white handkerchief from her pocket and handed it to her. "I'll help," she said, nodding. "There's no way I could refuse you when you're crying like that. Not to mention, if Fanny went instead and something happened, the Ministry would probably launch a full investigation into Hogwarts. Besides, Anne figured the real danger would come from facing Professor Quirrell. The earlier challenges weren't too risky." As soon as Anne agreed, Fanny looked excited, clearly intrigued by the prospect of an adventure. Anne quickly extinguished that flame. "Fanny, please remember your status. Adventures like this really aren't for you." Fanny's head drooped. But Anne's next words made her perk right back up. "But I do have a mission for you. Since Hermione failed to track Professor Snape, I'm passing that task on to you. Think you can handle it? It's an important job." Fanny's eyes sparkled as she nodded eagerly. Every child that age dreamed of a grand adventure, especially one involving the legendary Philosopher's Stone. "But you're only to observe. When it's time to sleep, you go back and sleep, understand?" Anne added. "Promise me." "All right, I promise." Anne nodded, then turned to Hermione. "Okay, since we've decided, let's go. You can fill me in as we walk." Hermione nodded. As they neared the Gryffindor common room, they ran into Harry and Ron at the entrance. It looked like they were just about to set out for the stone themselves. Their eyes lit up when they saw Anne. "Since you're going, we'd better get moving," Anne said briskly. "It's getting dark. If we hurry, we might even make it back in time to sleep. Hermione's briefed me a bit, but personally, I don't think it's Snape trying to steal the stone. I think it's Professor Quirrell. We can talk more when we reach the three-headed dog." The four of them hurried to the fourth floor. As they got closer, their steps grew more cautious. But at this hour, Filch was probably eating. He didn't spend all day guarding the place. Seeing no one around, Anne whispered, "Not a bad start." But when they reached the room with the three-headed dog, their optimism vanished. The door was already open. They rushed inside. Fluffy, the giant three-headed dog, was asleep. At its massive feet, a violin was playing by itself. "Damn! Snape must have gone in," Harry whispered. Anne said nothing. Some things had to be seen to be believed. She turned to the others. "From here on out, this gets dangerous. We might have to face a professor. Are you absolutely sure about this?" It was her last attempt to talk them out of it. All three nodded. "All right, Harry, Ron, you two move Fluffy's paw off the trapdoor." "I'm not touching that thing." Harry and Ron nodded and got to work. Hermione looked at Anne, waiting for instructions. "Watch that violin. If it stops, let me know immediately," Anne said. Once Fluffy's paw was removed, Harry opened the trapdoor. Anne walked over, pulled out her wand from inside her robes, and whispered, "Lumos." A gentle white light shone from her wand. She held it over the trapdoor and peered down. It was pitch black, and no bottom was in sight. Pulling her wand back, Anne asked, "This might be a long drop. Who wants to go first?" "I will," Harry stepped forward. "This was my idea. If anything happens, go straight to Dumbledore. Don't follow me." Ron fidgeted. "All right." Hermione gave Ron a sharp look, then turned to Anne, silently urging her to say something. "You'll be fine. Go see what's down there," Anne said calmly. Harry jumped in. After a few seconds, they heard his voice echo up from the depths. "It's okay. It's a soft landing, you can come down." Anne looked at Ron, who also jumped in. Then she turned to Hermione. I'll go next. When you come down, make sure to close the trapdoor behind you, all right? After Hermione nodded, Anne jumped. Then Hermione followed. What is this stuff? Ron yelled as he landed. No idea. Some kind of plant. Good thing it's here, Harry replied. Anne landed on something soft and springy. But then she felt something strange, 2 tendrils wrapping around her wand hand. Oh no! Lucky? This thing's devil's snare. Hermione. Fire. Light, anything. It's wrapped around my hand. Hermione whipped out her wand, muttering rapidly. A soft blue flame, like a cluster of glowing bluebells, flared from her wand. Almost immediately, Anne felt the plant retreating. It clearly hated fire. Soon all 3 of them were free and joined Hermione. Good thing we've got an herbology whiz and a witch who can make fire, Ron sighed. Harry pointed to a stone archway ahead. A few more challenges ahead. They entered a sloping stone corridor. Other than their footsteps, only the faint dripping of water echoed around them. As they neared the end, Ron whispered, "Do you guys hear that?" They all listened. There was a faint rustling and a clinking sound. Could it be a ghost? Ron asked. Not sure, sounds like wings flapping, Harry replied. There's light up ahead, Hermione said. I see movement. They reached a well-lit room with a high-arched ceiling. Hundreds of dazzling, gem-colored birds flitted through the air. On the far side of the room stood a heavy wooden door. If we cross the room, will they attack us? Ron asked. Anne glanced around. No, don't they look familiar? The others looked more closely. Suddenly, Harry exclaimed, "They're keys! Winged keys!" Exactly. Let's go have a look, Anne said, crossing the room. Hermione tried the lock with Alohomora, but nothing happened. Ron peered at the keyhole. Looks like we need an old-fashioned key. Harry scanned the room. In the corner, he spotted 3 broomsticks. There. We can use those to catch the key. All right. Hermione, stay by the door. The rest of us will go up, Anne instructed. No one objected. Each grabbed a broom, kicked off, and soared into the sky filled with fluttering keys. Let's figure out which one it is first. Ron called. Harry, the youngest seeker in a century, lived up to his title. He quickly spotted a large silver key with bent wings and frayed feathers, clearly the one that had been shoved into the lock before. That's it, he shouted. Big silver one. Light blue wings, all the feathers are bent. Ron shot toward it but crashed into the ceiling. We need to trap it. Harry yelled. Ron, cut it off from above. Anne, guard the bottom. I'll grab it. Ron swooped, Anne surged upward, and the key zipped between them. Harry chased it down. As it darted toward the wall, he lunged, and with a loud screech, he pinned it against the stone with one hand. Cheers echoed from below. They landed quickly. Harry ran to the door, the key squirming in his grasp. He shoved it into the lock and turned. Click! The door opened. A/N, meddling friends. We're almost at the end of this volume, just thinking about it makes me a little excited. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 23, Chapter 23, The End of the First Year. The second room was pitch black. They couldn't see a thing. But as soon as they stepped in, the lights suddenly flared to life, revealing a startling sight. They were standing at the edge of a massive chessboard. In front of them stood giant black chess pieces, each taller than any of them, seemingly carved from black stone. On the far side of the room were the white pieces, facing them. What now? Harry asked in a whisper. Isn't it obvious? Ron replied. We have to play our way across the room. Behind the white pieces stood a door. Anne studied the chessboard from the edge and nodded. Looks like each of us will have to take the place of a chess piece to get across. Ron walked over to a black knight and touched its horse. Immediately, the stone came to life. The horse pawed at the ground, and the knight turned its helmeted head to look at Ron. Do we need to join you to cross? Ron asked. The knight nodded. Ron turned to the others. Okay, no offense, but neither of you are great at chess, and Anne. You play, Anne said quickly. I don't know how to play wizard chess. Go is more my thing. Harry and Hermione agreed. Ron took the knight's place. After surveying the board, he said, Harry, you take the bishop's spot. Hermione, you're the rook beside him. Anne stepped beside the Black King. I'll be the king. Seems like the safest spot. The stone pieces responded to their conversation. The knight, king, bishop, and rook turned and stepped off the board, making room for Ron, Anne, Harry, and Hermione. White goes first, Ron said as a white pawn moved forward 2 squares. Ron commanded the black side. The others followed his directions silently. Anne barely had to move at all. When their first piece was taken, fear truly set in. The White Queen viciously knocked over a black knight and dragged it off the board. Twice, Ron saved Harry and Hermione from being captured, and he charged bravely, taking down almost as many white pieces as they lost. After more than 10 minutes of play, the board had far fewer pieces. Ron studied the board, then said gravely, There's only one way to win. I have to be taken. No. Harry and Hermione shouted. This is chess. Ron snapped. There are always sacrifices. I move forward, the White Queen will take me, and then you can checkmate the king, Harry. But... Anne's voice was cold and firm. He's right, Harry. You didn't think this was just a game, did you? You made your choice. Now deal with the consequences. Harry hesitated, then nodded. Okay. I'm going, Ron said, pale but determined. He stepped forward. The White Queen lunged. She raised her stone arm and struck Ron hard on the head. He collapsed. Hermione screamed but stayed on her square. The Queen dragged Ron off. He appeared unconscious. Harry moved 3 squares to the left. The White King removed his crown and dropped it at Harry's feet. They had won. The white pieces bowed and stepped back, clearing a path to the door. Harry and Hermione ran to Ron. Anne followed and checked his pulse. He's alive, just unconscious. Don't worry. Both sighed in relief. If Ron had died, they would never have forgiven themselves. Anne looked toward the next door. We've passed Professor Sprout's trap, the Devil's Snare. The enchanted keys must have been Professor Flitwick's. Professor McGonagall clearly enchanted the chess pieces. That leaves Quirrell's dark arts and Snape's potions. Hermione looked at Ron. We can't all go. Someone needs to stay with him. Harry nodded. He turned to Anne. Anne, can you stay with Ron? If he wakes up, take him and get Dumbledore. Hermione and I will continue. Anne glanced between Hermione and Ron, then nodded. All right. But Harry, be prepared. You're probably going to face Professor Quirrell. Harry nodded and took off with Hermione. Anne didn't bother with Ron. Instead, she walked back to the surviving chess pieces, curiously examining them. Incredible, she muttered. So this is what advanced transfiguration can do. She began touching the pieces, wondering if they hid more secrets. 5 minutes later, Ron stirred and groaned. He touched his head and sat up. When he saw it was just him and Anne, panic set in. Where are Harry and Hermione? Anne turned. You're awake. They moved on. We need to get up top and alert Dumbledore. Ron scrambled up. Right, let's go. Just then, footsteps echoed from the next room. Ron stiffened and drew his wand. Anne calmly held out a hand. Relax. I bet it's Hermione. Indeed, Hermione rushed out, breathless. Ron! You're awake. Let's go alert Dumbledore. They grabbed brooms and flew back up. It took time to open the trapdoor. When they reached Fluffy, Hermione used the flute Hagrid gave Harry to lull the dog back to sleep. They rushed downstairs, only to bump into Dumbledore coming up. He asked simply. Harry went to confront him, didn't he? Then he hurried past. Once he was gone, Anne stretched and said, well, that's that. With Dumbledore there, Harry will be fine. Let's go back to bed. She checked her watch and strolled downstairs. Back at the dorm, Fanny was already in bed. Her eyes lit up when she saw Anne. She jumped up and whispered, did it work? What happened? Anne shot her a look. Yes, Miss Fanny, it went just fine. Thanks to you. Now may I please wash up first? Fanny trailed behind, pouting. Anne, are you mad at me? In the washroom, Anne ignored her as she brushed her teeth. When she finished, Fanny eagerly handed her a towel. Anne took it without comment, eyes closed as she washed. When she opened them, Fanny stood there with her pajamas. Anne couldn't help but chuckle at herself for being mad at an 11-year-old. Fanny's eagerness softened her mood. Anne accepted the clothes with a smile. All right, I'm not mad. Just don't blackmail me like that again. I see you as a friend. You should be helping me, not threatening me. Understand? Fanny nodded quickly, then reached out and ruffled Anne's hair. You act like such a little grown-up. But you're cute. Your hair is so soft. Anne's eyes narrowed. Fanny Charles. Out. For the next 3 days, no matter what Fanny said, Anne ignored her. She had seen something dangerous in Fanny's eyes. She just knew Fanny would seize every chance to ruffle her hair. She wasn't going to let another person join Jill and Aaron in violating her personal space. 3 days later, the end-of-year feast began. The Great Hall was decorated in green and silver to celebrate Slytherin's 7th straight House Cup win. A massive banner bearing the Slytherin serpent hung behind the staff table. Anne sat at the Slytherin table with Fanny, who had recently promised not to touch her hair again. They whispered about the recent adventure. The hall buzzed until everything fell quiet. Anne looked up. Harry had arrived, drawing everyone's attention. But the silence didn't last. Moments later, Dumbledore entered. The noise faded once more. Another year has come and gone, he said cheerfully. Before we dig into this delicious feast, let me share some wise old man ramblings. It's been a marvelous year. Your minds are surely richer than before. A whole summer awaits to digest all this learning. But first, the House Cup. The current standings are: 4th, Hufflepuff, 352 points; 3rd, Gryffindor, 422 points; 2nd, Ravenclaw, 426 points; 1st, Slytherin, 472 points. The Slytherin table erupted in cheers and stomping. Well done, Dumbledore said. But recent events must be considered. Silence fell. The Slytherins looked uneasy. Ahem, a few last-minute points. First, Mr. Ronald Weasley. Ron flushed bright red. For playing the finest game of wizard chess Hogwarts has seen in years, I award Gryffindor 20 points. Cheers nearly tore the ceiling down. Even the enchanted stars above trembled. Second, Miss Hermione Granger, for cool logic in the face of fire, another 20 points to Gryffindor. Hermione buried her face in her arms. Anne suspected she was crying. Gryffindor rose 40 points in minutes. Third, Harry Potter, for bravery and courage, 30 points to Gryffindor. More cheering. Now Gryffindor had passed Slytherin by 10 points. Then Dumbledore smiled. And lastly, Anne Reeve. For her remarkable knowledge of herbology that helped her friends escape the devil's snare, I award Slytherin 20 points. The Slytherin table exploded in celebration. They nearly lost their 8-year streak. At the Gryffindor table, Hermione, Ron, and Harry clapped hard for Anne. She had helped them plenty. Fanny hugged her tight while people from every table cheered. Anne looked exasperated. Dumbledore had effectively defined her as part of the trio now. Everyone would assume they were friends. This means, Dumbledore had to shout over the noise, Slytherin wins again. 8 years running. Anne barely touched her food. People kept patting her back and congratulating her. Even Malfoy didn't glare at her. The Bloody Baron nodded. Well done. 2 days later, grades were posted. Hermione was top of the year. A Ravenclaw came second. Anne was third. Fanny placed fifth. With grades announced, trunks were packed, and letters reminded students not to use magic over summer break. Hagrid led them to the boats crossing the lake. Anne boarded the Hogwarts Express in a shirt and jeans. Across from her sat Harry and Ron. Hermione was beside her. Fanny would travel home through the Floo network. Just like during Christmas, Hermione spotted Anne immediately after exiting the school. They stuck together the whole way, despite Anne's protests. Dumbledore said it himself, Ron teased, imitating the headmaster's voice. Anne Reeve, who used her herbology skills to help her friends. They chatted the entire ride. Even with Anne's blank expression, they carried on enthusiastically. As they disembarked, Hermione waved. Have a great summer, Anne. I'll write to you. Anne deeply regretted giving her address. But what was done. And truthfully, she was curious to experience her first magical summer. A/N, Volume 2, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon/crimson_lore. Chapter 24, Summer Life. Anne's 12th birthday was wonderful. Even though Erin was swamped with work during the summer, spring, and summer being peak mating seasons for many magical creatures, and a time when wild magical beasts were either giving birth or becoming aggressive, he still made time to celebrate her birthday. He took a full week off, and he had never missed a single one of Anne's birthdays. That was something he had always promised her. Anne, turning 12 is special. It's your first birthday as a young witch, he said, as he brought her to Heathrow Airport on the outskirts of London. You just came home yesterday afternoon and told me to pack right away. Where are you planning to take me for my birthday? I haven't even told Fanny or Jill. Anne called out as she followed behind Erin, who was pushing 2 large suitcases. Erin turned his head and gave her a mysterious smile. It's a surprise. You can always write to your friends once we get there. I'm sure they won't mind. Anne clutched the plane tickets in her hand. You don't need to say it, I already know. Tanzania, right? It says so on the tickets. Fine, I know you won't tell me more even if I ask. But I bet it's going to be amazing. Erin muttered under his breath, the Muggle world really is. When they arrived in Tanzania, Anne realized just how spectacular a birthday gift Erin had prepared. She followed him across the African plains to witness the Great Migration. Every year from May to June, the grasslands of Tanzania's Serengeti are gradually grazed bare. As the dry season stretches on, millions of herbivores, wildebeests, gazelles, zebras, migrate northward in a perilous journey in search of food and water. Anne spent an incredible week in the Serengeti National Park. There were indeed wizards in Africa, though not many. Most were concentrated in North African countries like Egypt and Morocco, where the economy was stronger and magical history more established. Most wizards active in Africa were Europeans conducting research or traveling. Only a handful of African countries had their own ministries of magic, and those few effectively governed the entire continent's magical community through a kind of African wizarding alliance. But Anne wasn't concerned with politics. She rode across the plains in an off-road vehicle driven by Aaron, shouting in excitement as they followed the migrating herds. She even camped in the wilderness in a magical tent, small on the outside but spacious as a two-story house on the inside. From Tanzania's capital, she sent photos and postcards to Fanny, Jill, and Hermione, taken with an ordinary Muggle camera. There was also a small outpost of the African Wizarding Alliance in the capital. When the week was over, and they landed back at Heathrow, Anne gave Aaron a big bear hug. "Uncle Aaron, this is the best birthday present I've ever gotten." Aaron's mood was lifted even more when Anne didn't dodge as he reached over to ruffle her hair. "Anne, I'll be away on assignment for quite a while this time. Be good while I'm gone, all right? If anything comes up, just write to me. I should be back by August, right before term starts." After Anne promised, Aaron boarded another plane. Anne returned by car to their home in West London. Their 2 large suitcases were sent ahead through a British Ministry of Magic outpost at the airport. Once home, Anne took just 2 days to settle back into her summer routine, tending to magical plants, recording their growth, conducting her own potion experiments, and helping Aaron care for the magical creatures in the basement. Honestly, the first time she had seen Aaron's basement, she had been amazed. It even had different climate zones. There were around 20 kinds of magical creatures kept there at one point, but now only a few remained. Aaron had taken the more delicate ones with him. Anne also used some of the climate zones to grow rare magical plants. Of the 5 species she was cultivating, 3 had been Christmas gifts from Fanny. For reasons of privacy, or maybe just habit, Anne hadn't told anyone else about her birthday, except for Jill and Aaron. A big part of it was that she didn't know anyone else's birthdays either. She only remembered Jill's from the orphanage. She didn't know Aaron's, Fanny's, or even Hermione's. It had always been this way, even in her past life. She couldn't even recall her parents' birthdays. Even if she remembered one year, she'd forget the next, lost in the distractions of daily life. 2 days after returning to London, Anne visited Jill's house and spent the day there, bringing her some souvenirs from Africa. Jill was thrilled to see her and very envious that Anne had gotten to travel to Tanzania. Another notable part of her summer was a thick letter she received from Hermione the day she returned. Hermione wrote about how jealous she was of Anne's trip and was deeply fascinated by what Anne had mentioned about African wizarding culture. She asked Anne a flurry of questions, though the bulk of the letter, of course, was about studying and summer homework. After reading it, Anne immediately regretted ever writing to Hermione. She had originally planned to only send postcards to Fanny and Jill, but Aaron had been beside her, nudging, "I heard you have 3 Gryffindor friends at Hogwarts, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger. You should write to them too. Good things are meant to be shared. I know you went on that adventure and even earned 20 points for Slytherin." When Anne asked how he knew about that, Aaron vaguely replied, "Well, guardians are supposed to stay informed about the people they're looking after." The summer passed quietly but quickly. Anne accomplished one other important thing: she bought several books about Chinese cooking, and Abby had already learned to make a few simple dishes. 2 weeks before the new term, Anne received her Hogwarts acceptance letter. Term would begin on September 1, as usual, and students were to meet at King's Cross Station. What had changed was the second-year book list. Standard Book of Spells, Grade 2 by Miranda Goshawk. Break with a Banshee by Gilderoy Lockhart. Guddying with Ghouls by Gilderoy Lockhart. Holidays with Hags by Gilderoy Lockhart. Travels with Trolls by Gilderoy Lockhart. Voyages with Vampires by Gilderoy Lockhart. Wandering with Werewolves by Gilderoy Lockhart. Year with the Yeti by Gilderoy Lockhart. What is this? 7 garbage books. Anne muttered. Oh, right. This is the year of the Chamber of Secrets. She clearly remembered Lockhart's pompous character from the films. I can't believe a person like him exists in the wizarding world, what a show-off. I really don't want to waste money on these books. But she had no choice. Hermione sent her a letter inviting her to go shopping at Diagon Alley the Wednesday before school started. Aaron also wrote to say he could only spare one day that week and suggested Anne invite some of her friends along. He wanted to meet the Gryffindors she always talked about. He even added a line at the end, "My fellow Gryffindors." So Anne wrote back to Hermione agreeing to meet. She also asked Fanny, who replied /. "Sorry, Anne. My butler already bought all my supplies the day after the list arrived. But my grandmother did agree to let me take the train to Hogwarts this year. Your dear friend, Fanny." After reading Fanny's letter, Anne sighed to herself again. Some people really did live in a different world. That Wednesday morning, Aaron arrived through the fireplace just as Anne was having breakfast, perfect timing. At Diagon Alley, Anne and Aaron exited the general goods store and headed toward Gringotts to withdraw money. They hadn't walked far when they spotted a familiar face. Harry was covered in dust, one lens of his glasses cracked. Standing next to him was the towering figure of Hagrid. The two were chatting as they walked. Anne was just about to call out when Aaron beat her to it. "Hey! Hagrid!" Hagrid turned, beaming. "Well, if it isn't Aaron. Long time no see. What magical creature have you been studying lately?" He gave Aaron a big hug. Anne waved at Harry. "Hey, Harry! Long time no see. What happened to you?" "Hey, Anne. I just, had a bit of an adventure." Anne waved it off. "If it's a long story, don't bother explaining." After the greetings, Aaron turned to Harry. "So, you're Harry Potter? Nice to meet you. I'm Aaron Hall, Anne's uncle. I heard about what happened last term. You were very brave." Harry glanced at Anne. She nodded, so he reached out to shake Aaron's hand. Nice to meet you too." Aaron noticed Harry's broken glasses and quickly pulled out his wand. With a flick and a muttered spell, Harry's glasses were good as new. "Whoa!" Harry took them off to look them over. "Thanks, they're as good as new." "No problem. I'm always happy to help a friend of Anne's." As the four of them headed toward Gringotts, Anne asked, "Uncle Aaron, how do you know Hagrid?" Hagrid jumped in eagerly. "Aaron's a friend to magical creatures. When something goes wrong in the Forbidden Forest, the Ministry sends him to sort it out." "Oh, we definitely need to grab a drink later. I still remember the last time we met, dealing with that." Aaron just smiled. Harry and Anne listened with interest. It wasn't often they got to hear stories about the Forbidden Forest. But just as Hagrid was getting into it, a familiar voice interrupted. Hermione came running down the steps of Gringotts. "Hey! Anne! Harry! Hagrid! You're all together!" Anne instinctively took a step back. She could tell Hermione was about to hug her. Sure enough, Hermione gave her a slight glare, as if scolding her for dodging. "Oh, it's so great to see you all. What are you doing together? Visiting Gringotts too? Harry, what happened to you? And Anne, who's this beside you?" Harry was overwhelmed by all the questions, so Anne stepped in. "We ran into each other on the way to Gringotts. And this is Aaron Hall, my uncle, he was in Gryffindor too." "Gryffindor? He's your uncle?" Harry and Hermione both looked surprised. "I assume you must be the clever Hermione Granger," Aaron said with a charming smile. "Pleasure to meet you. I'm Aaron Hall, Anne's uncle." A faint blush colored Hermione's cheeks. "Nice to meet you too." Before they could say more, heavy footsteps and a panting voice came from down the street. "Harry! Oh, thank goodness!" They turned to see Ron, Fred, George, Percy, and Mr. Arthur Weasley running over. As they reached the group, Arthur's eyes lit up. "Well, if it isn't Aaron! What are you doing here?" Anne blinked. Another person who knew Aaron? Just how many people did he know? Arthur. Long time no see. How have you been? The two men hugged warmly. Ron was stunned to see Harry. Where did you go? Hermione? Anne? Why are you all together? We just met on the street. I was just... Harry began, but didn't finish. Mrs. Weasley came rushing over, out of breath. Oh, Harry, dear, where were you? After Harry explained everything, Anne finally understood how Aaron knew Mr. Weasley. I interned at quite a few departments at the ministry after graduating, Aaron said, winking proudly at Anne. Once inside Gringotts, Hermione's parents caused another stir. They were exchanging Muggle money for wizarding currency, and Mr. Weasley, ever fascinated by Muggle things, invited them for a drink. He extended the same invitation to Aaron. See you in the lobby later, Hermione said to Anne as they separated. The Weasleys and Harry were led away by a goblin, while Anne and Aaron followed another. After withdrawing money, Mrs. Weasley took Ginny shopping for first-year supplies, while Mr. Weasley led the adults to the Leaky Cauldron. Let's give the kids some space, he said. They haven't seen each other all summer. 1 hour, flourish and blots. Anne was more than happy. Walking around in such a large group drew too much attention. Now she could relax. She, Ron, Harry, and Hermione wandered through Diagon Alley, enjoying ice cream and picking up parchment and ink together. When Hermione asked Anne for more details about her trip to Tanzania, Ron and Harry perked up. What? You went to Tanzania? Blimey, I'll probably never get to go anywhere like that. Where exactly is Tanzania? Under their eager questioning, Anne gave a brief rundown of what she'd seen and done. By the end, she had made a silent vow, next time, she'd definitely avoid meeting up with this crowd again. Aaron wouldn't have an excuse to see them again anyway. A/N, just a fun fact, Anne is a Taurus, and Hermione is a Virgo. Ha ha ha. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 25, The Start of Second Year. An hour passed quickly, and they made their way to Flourish and Blots. But they weren't the only ones heading there. By the time they reached the bookstore, a huge crowd had already gathered outside. A large banner hung above the entrance. Gilderoy Lockhart book signing today 12:34:30 p.m. Magical Me autobiography. We get to meet him in person. Hermione exclaimed. The other three turned to look at her. I mean, nearly all the books on our list were written by him. Yeah, I was shocked when I got the list, 7 trashy books. I don't even want to waste my money, Anne muttered without thinking. Harry and Ron stared at her in surprise, while Hermione looked slightly offended. Anne, how can you? Ron quickly cut in, Merlin's beard. Anne, don't say that in front of my mum. Anne shrugged indifferently and mumbled, I'm just telling the truth. You'll see. Her muttering wasn't quiet enough to escape their ears, but before they could question her, a voice called out from inside the shop. Ron? Harry? Are you here? The 4 of them quickly squeezed through the door. Lockhart was seated behind a table, and the entire store was plastered with huge photographs of him. In every one, he was winking and flashing his dazzling white teeth. The Weasleys, the Grangers, and Aaron were all in line waving at them. Oh, good, you're here. We'll get to meet him soon. Mrs. Weasley said nervously, smoothing down her hair. Ron and Harry shot Anne a look that clearly said, don't say anything outrageous. I'm not stupid. Like I'd say anything here with so many Lockhart fanatics around, Anne thought. She did, however, forget that someone in the group counted as a fanatic. Much later, when Anne jokingly recalled this moment and her thoughts on the excited crowd, she paid a small price for it. Anne made her way to Aaron, who was holding a stack of books, and tugged at his sleeve to pull him out of the line. Hermione gave her a disapproving glare, which Anne ignored. Once they reached the second floor of the bookstore, Anne let go of his sleeve and said, "Uncle Aaron, I don't need a signature. Let's just buy the books later." Aaron looked at her expressionless face and smiled, ruffling her hair. "Not a fan of his, huh, Anne?" Anne didn't dodge the gesture and only gave a silent nod. All that talking earlier had left her throat dry. Aaron just assumed she was throwing a rare childish tantrum. "All right, we'll skip the signing and wait up here for a bit." Suddenly, applause erupted from downstairs. Anne and Aaron walked to the wooden railing and looked down at the signing table. Lockhart was now posing for a photo with Harry. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lockhart's voice rang out as he raised a hand to quiet the crowd, "what an extraordinary moment this is. I've been keeping a little secret, one I've waited to share until just the right occasion. When young Harry walked into the shop today, he only meant to buy my autobiography. I insisted on giving him a copy." More applause. "But what he doesn't know," Lockhart said dramatically, shaking Harry slightly and knocking his glasses askew, "is that he and his classmates are about to receive something far more valuable than magical me. Indeed, I am thrilled and honored to announce that starting this September, I will be the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher at Hogwarts." Another round of applause burst out below. Anne, however, muttered to herself, "Great. A completely useless defense teacher, just what we needed." "Hey, Malfoy!" Aaron's voice interrupted her thoughts. Anne turned her gaze toward the door. Draco Malfoy was standing there, with his father. It looked like the two Malfoys were arguing with Mr. Weasley. But the shop was packed and noisy, so it was hard to make out what was being said. Anne saw Mr. Malfoy take an old book from Ginny's cauldron with a sneer. Mr. Weasley lunged at him, and the two men ended up in a scuffle. "Oh no!" Aaron rushed downstairs. Anne followed, holding her stack of books. Aaron stepped in to separate the two, and Hagrid soon arrived as well. Before leaving, Mr. Malfoy tossed the book back into Ginny's cauldron with a sneer. "You'd better hope you always have someone around to save you." He gave Aaron a cold look and walked out. "Don't mind him, Arthur. You know what that family's like," Hagrid said, trying to comfort Mr. Weasley. Hermione was calming her parents, who had clearly been startled by the commotion. "Let's head out," Aaron suggested. The group left the shop and gathered around the fireplace in the leaky cauldron. Once everyone had calmed down, they said their goodbyes. The Weasleys and Harry left using Flo powder, returning to the burrow. Aaron and Anne did the same. The Grangers planned to drive back into the city. Their car was parked outside the pub. Back home, Aaron seemed quite pleased with Anne's 3 Gryffindor friends. Before leaving for work again, he went on and on about how they were all in the same house, should help one another, and support each other in times of need. In short, he was delighted that Anne had made friends. September 1st arrived quickly. Anne packed her things and said goodbye to Orby. She hailed a taxi and arrived at King's Cross Station at 10:25 a.m. She and Fanny had agreed to meet at 10:30 at the entrance. Fanny was taking the train for the first time, and of course, as her friend, Anne had to help. Right on time, a sleek black car pulled up quietly beside her. Fanny stepped out cheerfully and waved. "Hey, Anne. So good to see you. I was just wondering how you were planning to get here." A well-dressed young man stepped out from the driver's seat. Wearing a tailored suit, tie, and white gloves, he bowed politely. "Good morning, Miss Reeve. A pleasure to meet you." Anne returned the greeting, though her eyes shifted curiously to Fanny. Fanny stepped beside Anne and introduced him. "This is Lang, my family's butler's son. He drove me here." "Anne, how do we actually board the train?" Lang smiled and stood nearby, awaiting instructions. "Where's your luggage? Let's carry it in together. You've got your ticket, right?" Just follow my lead. Fanny grinned. Oh, I already sent my luggage to school. The class divide is real, Anne thought. Alright, then let's go. You can tell Lang to head back. Fanny nodded to Lang. You can go now. I'll be fine with Anne. Of course, Miss Fanny. Miss Reeve. Take care. Lang gave Anne a polite smile before driving off. Fanny was bursting with excitement. It was her first time on a train, and she chatted non-stop. Anne felt like she was taking her younger cousin out for a day trip. Once they passed through platform 9 3/4, Fanny begged to go through again, and Anne had to quickly pull her back. There weren't many people on the platform yet, so Anne led Fanny to the last carriage and entered an empty compartment. Anne lifted her trunk and placed it on the overhead rack. She'd grown a lot over the summer, now only half an inch shorter than Fanny, though her face still looked small and delicate. Fanny stood in the corridor, peeking out of the window. Wow, it's so lively. That means Muggles can come see their children off too, right? Anne pulled a book from her bag, How to Better Nurture Your Magical Plants, and replied casually, yeah, the wizarding world does have some Muggle-friendly rules. Also, maybe don't stick your head out of the window like that, it's not safe. Fanny pouted and pulled her head back, peering through the glass instead. Anne, I see Malfoy. And Crabbe and Goyle too. Malfoy's actually taking the train. A moment later, she gasped again. Pansy. Pansy's here too. Oh, is that her father with her? So many people from our house. Fanny chirped. Anne was too absorbed in her book. She was reading about how to safely repot a hazardous magical plant, to offer more than the occasional nod or grunt. Then Fanny said, Anne, I just saw your Gryffindor friend, Hermione Granger. Let's invite her to sit with us. Anne replied absent-mindedly. A beat later, wait, what? Too late. Fanny had stuck her head back out the window. Hey, Hermione. Anne's here, she wants you to join us. Hermione had been saying goodbye to her parents nearby. She looked up, smiled, and after a few words with her parents, made her way over with 2 trunks. Fanny turned back, beaming. She's coming. Let's help her with her things. What choice do I have? Anne sighed, setting her book aside. Anne didn't even know what to say at that point. She set down her book and stepped out of the compartment. There was a metal-grated step between the train carriage and the platform. Hermione was standing there, gripping the handle of her trunk with both hands, clearly struggling to lift it on board. Anne walked over, bent down, and grabbed the handle with her right hand, her fingers brushing against Hermione's. Let go, Anne said calmly. I'll lift it up. Hermione hesitated. But, it's really heavy. In that case, I'll use both hands. Just let go, Anne replied, turning slightly so she was facing Hermione directly. She placed her other hand on the side handle of the trunk. Sensing Anne's steady grip, Hermione released the handle without argument. Truth be told, the moment Anne first held the trunk, Hermione had already felt most of the weight disappear. Letting go of the side handle, Anne lifted the trunk into the carriage with one hand. It is a bit heavy. Don't tell me you packed all your books in this one. More or less. Hermione admitted, standing on the platform and watching Anne hoist the trunk effortlessly. Anne glanced at the second, smaller trunk next to Hermione. Go ahead and get on. I'll bring the other one up, it doesn't look that light either. Hermione stepped aside as Anne climbed down again. It's only a few books. Hermione said sheepishly. Anne brought up the second trunk. Inside the compartment, Fanny had tried lifting Hermione's trunk out of curiosity. She managed to raise it only about 2 centimeters before giving up with a grunt. Hermione, meanwhile, was flipping through the book and had left on the small table, How to Better Nurture Your Magical Plants. All right, "You two step out of the compartment for a second," Anne said. "I'll put the lighter one on the rack and the heavier one under the seat." Hermione and Fanny stepped outside while Anne lifted the lighter trunk, rose up on her toes, and placed it securely on the overhead luggage rack. Then she bent down and slid the heavy trunk beneath the seat. Dusting off her hands, she straightened up and called out, "All done. Come back in." The two girls stepped back inside. Fanny took the window seat across from Anne, while Hermione, after closing the compartment door behind her, sat down next to Anne. More and more people were boarding the train by now. As soon as Fanny sat down, she leaned forward, eyes sparkling. "Anne, how are you so strong?" Hermione was looking at her with equal curiosity. "Strong? This is nothing," Anne thought to herself. "In my past life, I had to haul furniture up to a 6th-floor apartment by myself." But aloud, she simply said, "At the orphanage, we had to do farm work 2 or 3 times a week. After 3 years of that, of course I got stronger." Fanny and Hermione's expressions changed slightly. Noticing their reaction, Anne added, "I don't mind talking about it. Besides, working under the sun builds character. And if I weren't strong, who would have lifted all those trunks today?" Fanny blinked, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "But Anne, you're still so pale. Did you slack off during work or something?" Anne paused, recalling those years working at the Gill family's place. Every time, Gill would drag her off under the excuse of wanting to play, and Anne, definitely not some naive child, had learned quickly how to get out of hard labor whenever possible. "Aha, Anne! You are hiding something," Fanny said, narrowing her eyes at Anne's slightly guilty expression. Hermione, sitting beside her, noticed the tips of Anne's ears were turning red. Thankfully, at that moment, a loud whistle pierced the air. "We're leaving, aren't we?" Fanny exclaimed, pressing her face against the window. "Yes, the whistle means the train's about to depart," Anne replied with relief. Hermione let out a small laugh. Anne's ears turned a bit redder. Then Hermione, ever the curious one, changed the subject. "Anne, about that glass orb you gave me last time, why did it end up looking like that? The silver inside was beautiful, but I couldn't find anything about it in any of the books I checked." Fanny perked up too. "I meant to ask you about that at the end of last term, but I forgot. It really was pretty. I even asked my uncle, he's a powerful wizard, but he said the orb had no magical signature at all. No trace of magic. How did you do that? And those little silver patterns inside had actual shapes." Hermione chimed in again, "I also noticed the shapes changed depending on the weather. When it rained, I thought it had broken or something." "Really? I didn't even notice," Anne said, glancing at Hermione with admiration. "Leave it to a top student to catch that kind of detail. I only added a tiny bit of that substance, it shouldn't have been obvious." "It's hard to explain exactly what I added," Anne continued, "but it's not a magical substance. It's something from the physical world, the Muggle world. A chemical compound that reacts physically." "Chemistry again?" Fanny scrunched her nose, clearly uninterested. "Chemistry? Physics?" Hermione repeated, intrigued. "I've heard of those. Muggle schools teach them, don't they? That's what my cousin said, anyway." "But Anne, how do you know this stuff?" "Ah, well, that's a secret," Anne said with a smile. "But those glass orbs? They're called storm bottles, or sometimes weather bottles." By now, both Fanny and Hermione were used to Anne being cryptic, and let it slide. The three girls chatted the rest of the way. Time seemed to fly, and before they knew it, the train had arrived at Hogwarts. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 26, The Start of Term. When the train finally pulled into the station, Hermione looked anxious. Ron and Harry hadn't come to find her the entire ride, and now they were nowhere in sight. She turned to Anne with concern. "Anne, do you think they missed the train?" Fanny, overhearing this, looked shocked. "What? They missed the train? What's the school going to do about that? They won't get expelled, will they?" Hermione looked even more worried now, so Anne answered calmly, "Of course not. I'm sure something must have come up that kept them from getting here on time. And with Dumbledore at Hogwarts, there's no way he'd allow Harry Potter to be expelled. Don't worry." Anne's reassurance helped Hermione feel a little better, though her questions didn't end there. "Then, how will they get to school? They might send a letter to Professor McGonagall explaining what happened. Doesn't Harry have an owl? I'm sure the school has contingency plans. Hogwarts has been around for over 1,000 years, this can't be the first time something like this has happened." Both Fanny and Hermione nodded thoughtfully. What Anne said made sense, and their worries eased. Still, Anne glanced up at the pitch-black sky and silently added in her mind, though arriving by car might actually be a first in Hogwarts history. Second-year students no longer had to cross the lake by boat. Instead, they followed their house prefects to the other side of the platform. Hagrid led the first years toward the docks for their boat ride. Near the platform was a large open space where several horseless carriages were waiting. At least, they appeared horseless. As they approached, Anne noticed that Fanny didn't seem to see the creatures pulling the carriages. Fanny even commented in surprise, "We're riding carriages that move on their own this year." Anne fell silent. She vaguely remembered that only certain people could see the creatures pulling the carriages. She made a mental note to visit the library once they were back at school. In the Great Hall of Hogwarts, the sorting ceremony was about to begin. Students sat at their house tables, waiting expectantly. Anne took her seat and, out of habit, scanned the staff table. The first person she noticed was Gilderoy Lockhart. He stood out like a sore thumb among the professors in his shimmering aqua robes, grinning radiantly. Her gaze shifted down the table. Dumbledore sat in the center, speaking quietly to Professor McGonagall beside him. Professor Flitwick was watching the Ravenclaw table with interest. Hagrid sat nearby, sipping from a comically large tankard. But where was Professor Snape? Anne looked around the hall but saw no sign of him. Odd. Where was he? She didn't have time to dwell on it. Professor McGonagall had just brought out the sorting hat and placed it on a stool in front of the line of nervous new students. She gave a brief speech explaining the procedure, and the sorting hat launched into a new song, different from the one it sang the year before. While the sorting went on, Anne scanned the hall again. Still no sign of Snape. And with Harry and Ron still missing, Anne began to suspect where he might have gone. She looked at Dumbledore and thought, if Dumbledore sent Snape after them, that says a lot about how much he trusts him. The sorting ended, but Harry and Ron never arrived. Rumors, however, were already spreading among the students. That day's Daily Prophet had published an article. 3 Muggles had reportedly spotted a flying car in the sky, complete with photos. Many suspected it had something to do with Harry and Ron. Most Gryffindors were delighted. They thought flying a car to school was the coolest thing ever. Others, however, whispered nervously about the possibility of expulsion. After all, 3 Muggles had seen them. After dinner, Draco Malfoy looked positively gleeful, as if Harry and Ron had already been expelled. At the Slytherin table, he loudly read the Daily Prophet article to anyone who would listen. Anne and Fanny didn't stick around, they went straight back to their dormitory. Neither of them had any interest in listening to Malfoy's gloating, especially since Lockhart had also been loudly commenting on the situation in the Great Hall, saying how Harry, as a student, should never have done something so reckless, while, of course, using the opportunity to praise himself. Anne had little patience for self-important blowhards with no real skill. Fanny, however, saw it differently. Back in the hall, she'd been practically bouncing. Oh, that really was Gilderoy Lockhart, wasn't it? And he's teaching us defense against the dark arts? Amazing! I've read all about him in Witch Weekly and the Daily Prophet. I've even read all his books. Too bad my butler missed his book signing when he bought them. Pansy told me hers are all signed, and Anne cut her off. Didn't you say you admired people with actual ability? You think he qualifies? Anne, you don't know? Professor Lockhart received the Order of Merlin, 3rd class. He's an honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League. And he's won Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award 5 times. Of course he's capable. I think the only thing he's truly good at is deceiving people, Anne muttered. Why don't you like him? Lots of students do. He's handsome, and he has such a lovely smile. His books are full of exciting stories. Fanny, Anne thought, you're still too young and too naive. You'll come to realize eventually that it's not about what someone says they've done, but what they've actually done. Fanny tilted her head thoughtfully. That makes sense, kind of like how you keep saying those 3 from Gryffindor aren't your friends, but then you keep helping them. Doesn't that mean you are their friend? Anne paused, then replied seriously, Fanny, that's not the same. I didn't choose to help them. The circumstances left me no choice, and you played a big part, too. Fanny gave her a skeptical look. That sounds overly complicated. But you still helped them, didn't you? I don't really see the difference. Anne sighed. Note to self, never try to explain complex ideas to a child. Fine. Fanny, you keep admiring Professor Lockhart, then. I don't like him, I just admire him, that's all. The next day, Monday Slytherin table, Great Hall. Anne studied her class schedule. It hadn't changed much from last term, except defense against the dark arts was now on Mondays, and they'd be sharing that class with Gryffindor. In fact, Slytherin had 4 joint classes with Gryffindor that week, defense on Monday, history of magic on Tuesday, flying on Thursday, and potions on Friday. Anne noticed Draco Malfoy shooting a smug glance across the hall toward the Gryffindor table, no doubt already scheming ways to get Harry and his friends kicked out of Hogwarts. Not long after, he got just the opportunity he wanted. Because Ron had recklessly flown his father's car to school, Arthur Weasley was now under investigation by the Ministry of Magic, and Mrs. Weasley had sent Ron a howler. The angry voice echoed through the Great Hall, and everyone near Ron clapped their hands over their ears. Anne, curious, turned to Fanny. What was that? Fanny gave Ron a sympathetic look. He got a howler. Anne watched the letter burn itself to ashes in midair. Truly, living up to its name. Malfoy seized the chance to mock Ron and Harry loudly at the Slytherin table. Monday morning's charms class with Professor Flitwick, shared with Ravenclaw, was refreshingly quiet. Without Gryffindor present, Malfoy was much more bearable. After lunch, Anne and Fanny strolled back to the Slytherin common room. Fanny had forgotten one of her books. Anne wasn't thrilled. Honestly, Fanny, you didn't need to come back for it. You already brought 6 of his books with you. Anne, you're just biased against Professor Lockhart. You should actually read his books, they're full of fascinating adventures. They're full of tired old fairy tales meant to fool children. Anne muttered. How do you know? Have you read them? Fanny asked sharply. No. I just guessed, Anne said, recalling how one of Lockhart's books had gotten soaked during a summer potions experiment. But didn't you say last time that if someone hasn't experienced something firsthand, they don't have the right to judge it? Fanny, that's not, but before Anne could finish, Fanny dragged her into a nearby courtyard. Harry, Hermione, and Ron were there, along with Malfoy and a crowd of students from various houses. Malfoy was calling out in a mocking voice. Autograph photos, Potter? Are you giving out signed photos? Standing behind him were the hulking Crabbe and Goyle. "Form a line, everyone!" Malfoy called out. "Harry Potter's handing out autographs." "I am not," Harry growled, clenching his fists. Malfoy ignored him, clearly delighted. Next to Harry stood a small first-year Gryffindor, Colin Creevey. He held a Muggle camera and shouted indignantly, "You're just jealous." Malfoy raised his chin. "Jealous? Of what? I don't want a scar like that on my forehead, thanks." Ron yelled, "Shut it, Malfoy." That only made Malfoy smirk more. "Careful, Weasley. Wouldn't want you in trouble again, or else your mummy might have to come collect you." He mimicked Mrs. Weasley's voice, "if you don't behave properly." The students around them burst into laughter. Just then, Lockhart parted the crowd dramatically and strode to the center. "What's going on? Who's giving out signed photos?" Anne instinctively turned to leave, but Fanny grabbed her arm. "Professor Lockhart's here, let's see how he handles this before we go." "Didn't you need to get your book?" "I'll go later." Anne sighed. Nearby, Hermione was gazing at Lockhart with shining eyes, holding a copy of Voyages with Vampires. Anne also noticed that most of the girls in the crowd had the same look. Lockhart slung an arm around Harry. "Ah, Harry, there you are. Giving out signed photos already? At your age? That's not a great look, it might come off as a bit arrogant. But of course, I know you didn't mean it." He waved Colin over. "Perfect, let's make it a double autograph. Both of us." After signing the photo, he clapped his hands to dismiss the crowd. "All right, off you go. If anyone wants my autograph, come to my office later, we've got class soon." On the way back to the dorm, Fanny was practically glowing. "Anne, you saw that? He resolved everything so quickly. He really is capable." "Sure, as long as he thinks Harry's giving out photos." A/N, a quick insight into Anne's character: she's technically an adult, but only recently left school. As she adjusts to her new environment, her real personality begins to show. People are complex, not just one thing. Honestly, Anne is a bit of a self-insert. I wanted to write a story about a character in my heart, and the fun things she'd get up to at Hogwarts. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 27, Bad People and Bad Deeds. That afternoon was Defense Against the Dark Arts. As usual, the students of Slytherin and Gryffindor kept to their unspoken truce during class, sitting in two clearly divided camps on opposite sides of the room. Once everyone was seated, Lockhart, draped in aquamarine robes, cleared his throat to quiet the room. He picked up Neville's copy of Travels with Trolls, raising it so the blinking photograph of himself on the cover was in full view. He said, pointing to his own photo, am Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. Not that I talk about it, I'm not famous just for my smile." Anne resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "If you don't talk about it, then why bring it up? I see all of you have purchased the full set of my works." "Excellent. I thought we'd begin today with a little quiz." "Don't worry, it's just to see how well you've read my books." Once everyone had a paper, he said, "You'll have 30 minutes. Begin." Anne glanced down at her quiz paper, and immediately downgraded her opinion of him again. The quiz had 50 questions, things like: what is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color? What is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite pet? And so on. She scribbled "I don't know" across the top and tossed the paper aside. A moment later, Pansy tapped her on the shoulder. Anne turned, confused. Pansy held up her own paper, pointing to the few incomplete answers on it. Anne showed her own blank sheet. Pansy gave Anne a look of admiration and bent back down to write again. Fanny, having finished her quiz, glanced at Anne's and simply pursed her lips without saying anything. After 30 minutes, Lockhart began flipping through the quiz sheets right there at the front of the class. Tisk tisk tisk, almost no one remembered that my favorite color is lilac. I mentioned it in year with the Yeti. Clearly, some of you will need to do a bit of reviewing after class. Oh, what's this? Miss Hermione Granger? Who's Hermione Granger? Hermione shot her hand up from the front row. Excellent. 100%. 10 points to Gryffindor. Lockhart beamed. Fanny looked over at Hermione with envy. Anne just scowled. Next, Lockhart dramatically unveiled a cage on the desk. Inside were a bunch of Cornish pixies, electric blue, about 8 inches tall, with sharp, pointed faces and high-pitched screeches. They were bouncing around frantically. Without explaining anything to the class, Lockhart announced, right then. I'm letting them out. Let's see how you handle them. Crap. Doug. Anne muttered, diving under the desk and dragging Fanny with her. Fanny didn't understand at first, but a second later, she was very grateful she'd listened. A few Slytherins nearby who followed suit also ended up counting their blessings. The pixies exploded out of the cage like fireworks. 2 of them grabbed Neville by the ears and hoisted him into the air. Others shot straight for the back of the room, shattering glass and raining shards everywhere. The rest wreaked havoc, tossing ink bottles, ripping paper, flinging books and bags out the broken windows. Within minutes, half the class had taken shelter under their desks. Neville was now dangling from the chandelier. Come on now. Round them up, round them up. They're only pixies, Lockhart called out, then rolled up his sleeves and dramatically waved his wand. Pesky pixie pesternomi. Nothing happened. One of the pixies snatched Lockhart's wand and chucked it out the window. He gasped and immediately ducked under the teacher's desk, nearly getting flattened as the chandelier gave way and crashed down. The bell rang. Everyone bolted for the door. But with the crush of bodies, Anne decided it was safer to stay under the desk a while longer, pulling Fanny back with her to avoid a potential stampede. Once the chaos had calmed a little, they slipped toward the door, but Lockhart popped back up and cheerily said, "Ah! You 5, Miss Granger, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, Miss Anne, and Miss Fanny, would you kindly round up the remaining pixies and return them to their cage?" And with that, he walked out and closed the door behind him. Petrificus totalis. Anne muttered, freezing 2 pixies mid-air before standing up. Can he even be called a teacher? He was just trying to give us hands-on practice, Hermione said, flicking a freezing charm at 2 more pixies and tossing them in the cage. Anne dumped her frozen pixies in 2, muttering sarcastically, practice? He has no clue what he's doing. Have you ever seen a professor get his wand stolen by a pixie? She cast another freezing charm on a pixie sneaking up behind Hermione. Ron and Harry nodded in agreement. That's not fair, Hermione insisted. You've read his books, you know the amazing things he's done. Exactly. Fanny chimed in. He's been on so many adventures. I haven't read a single word of them, Anne said, catching another pixie. And who's to say any of those stories are even true? Even if they are, who knows if he actually did them? That's just being argumentative, Hermione sniffed. Anne shrugged without comment. On Saturday, Anne was out near Hagrid's hut, in a clearing where several massive pumpkins were growing. She was taking notes in a small notebook as Hagrid gestured at one of the pumpkins, explaining something. But then Hagrid stopped mid-sentence and waved toward the castle. Anne turned and saw Harry, Hermione, and Ron coming, Harry and Hermione supporting Ron, who was vomiting slugs. Hey! Harry! Ron! Hermione! Hagrid called, motioning for Anne to join him. Anne packed her notebook away and came closer, just in time to see Ron retch up another slug. Hagrid noticed too. What's happened to Ron? Get inside, quick! Hagrid practically carried Ron into his hut. Anne and Hermione brought up the rear. Anne, why are you here? Hermione asked. Anne pointed to the pumpkins. Hagrid's growing these. I heard about it from Professor Sprout, so I came to check on their growth. What happened to Ron? I'll explain inside. Once inside, Harry quickly described what had happened, but Hagrid didn't seem too worried. He just brought out a large copper basin and placed it in front of Ron. Better out than in. He sat down and added, just give it time, Ron. It'll probably stop on its own. Anne suddenly remembered a potion she'd brewed a few days ago and was meaning to test. Maybe not. Everyone turned to her. You've got an idea? Harry asked. Anne casually spun a nut between her fingers. Maybe. But first, how did this happen exactly? Ron's wand's busted, Hermione explained. He tried to hex Malfoy, but it backfired. Anne burst into laughter. She'd never heard of a wizard hexing himself. But she quickly caught herself under the group's unimpressed stares. Ahem, sorry. Just picturing it. Anyway, if that's all, I think I've got something. Hold on. She tucked away the coin and dug through her bag. Got it. She pulled out a tiny black glass bottle and handed it to Ron. Drink this. You'll feel better in 5 minutes. By the way, why didn't you go to Madame Pomfrey? Harry replied, we were near the Quidditch pitch. This was closer. And we thought maybe Hagrid could help. Ron opened the bottle, sniffed, and recoiled. What is this? You really don't want to know the ingredients. But hey, either you drink it, or you keep vomiting slugs. Up to you. Ron gave her a look, then pinched his nose and downed the potion. Immediately, he vomited even more slugs. Harry and Hermione stared at Anne. That's normal, Anne said. One last purge. He'll feel much better afterward. So, what did Malfoy say to set him off? Hagrid looked at Harry. Anne turned to Hermione. He called Hermione something, Harry said quietly. It must have been awful. Everyone was furious. Ron's voice was hoarse but clear, he called her a mudblood. Hagrid's face darkened. He turned to Hermione. Is that true? Hermione nodded. Yes. I don't really know what it means, but it sounded awful. Ron said angrily, it's the worst insult he could think of. Mudblood is what they call Muggleborns. It means dirty, inferior blood. Some purebloods, like the Malfoys, think they're better than everyone else. It's nonsense. He blinked. Wait. I don't feel sick anymore. He looked at Anne, astonished. Anne, it worked. She gave a distracted nod, her gaze on Hermione, who had gone pale and looked hurt. Anne thought of a psychology article she once read. Childhood insults could leave lasting wounds. She gave Hermione a soft smile and said gently, Hermione, can I ask you something? If someone gives you a gift, and you refuse it, who does the gift belong to? Hermione blinked, confused, but quickly answered, well, the person who gave it, I suppose. Anne nodded. Exactly. So if someone gives you something awful and you don't take it, then it's still theirs. Bad people always end up keeping their bad things. Hermione smiled faintly, cheeks a little pink. Harry and Ron also smiled, understanding her meaning. Anne rubbed her stomach, pulled out her notebook, and said to Hagrid, right. Problem solved. Now let's get to that magically enlarged pumpkin of yours. I'm starving, and I'd like to eat early. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 28, Colds and Halloween. October arrived with a damp chill that crept over the lawns and seeped into the castle. Suddenly, a wave of colds began to spread among both staff and students, keeping Madame Pomfrey busier than ever in the hospital wing. Anne wasn't spared. One Tuesday morning, she was woken by Fanny, only to find the world spinning around her. Dizzy and disoriented, she groaned, "Ugh! I feel awful." Fanny reached over and pressed the back of her hand to Anne's forehead, then sighed and said with exaggerated patience, "Anne, you can't just use the cold weather as an excuse to stay in bed. Besides, it's Professor Bin's history of magic this morning. Boring as he is, we still have to show up." Anne blinked at her. "Do I look like the kind of person who would fake an illness to skip class? Maybe I've got a cold. Can I take a sick day?" Fanny gave her a cheeky smile and said, "Honestly, Anne, you'd probably go pretty far just to avoid getting out of bed. And Hogwarts doesn't do sick days." "Humph! This place has no sympathy for sick students," Anne muttered as she dragged herself out of bed. The chilly air hit her immediately, making her shiver but also slightly clear-headed. She reached up to touch her forehead. No fever. Not yet, anyway. But by the time she made it to the frigid history of magic classroom and sat through the class, she knew without a doubt that she really was sick. She couldn't concentrate, and by the end of the lesson, her forehead was burning hot and her cheeks were flushed red. After class, Fanny gently touched Anne's forehead again. Her guilt was obvious. "I'm sorry, Anne," she said, remorseful. "I shouldn't have doubted you this morning." Then she promptly went to Professor Bin's and explained the situation. Upon seeing it was Fanny making the request, the ghostly professor agreed without fuss. Anne was thrilled to skip a history of magic lesson, but her excitement quickly faded when she reached the hospital wing. "I've got a few pepper-up potions," Madame Pomfrey said briskly, "but as for the cold itself? You'll just have to let it run its course. Should be gone in a week." Anne deflated immediately. "So, no cure?" she asked again. "Can I at least get a sick note?" "Don't be silly, dear," Madame Pomfrey replied. "It's just a cold. Hopefully it doesn't get bad enough that you need a sick note." As Anne stood there watching a Hufflepuff student drink a steaming vial of pepper-up potion, his ears immediately began to billow smoke, she quietly decided to pass. She grabbed Fanny and started walking away. "Wait, Anne, maybe you should take one," Fanny said, worried. Anne shook her head fiercely. "No way. Not happening. I'm not drinking that stuff. I'll tough it out, 7 days max." Fanny, defeated, had no choice but to let it go. The rain poured down on the castle for days like bullets hitting the windows. The lake rose, flower beds turned to mud, and Hagrid's pumpkins grew to the size of garden sheds. Anne remained visibly under the weather. Her days were reduced to a strict triangle of classroom, dormitory, and dining hall. Fanny worried about her constantly and often regretted not forcing her to drink that pepper-up potion. One day in the Great Hall, Fanny tried persuading her again. Anne croaked, "That's not even cold medicine. It won't help. Wizards don't even have cold medicine. I miss antibiotics, and aspirin." Fanny blinked. "Wait, are those tiny white pills from the Muggle world? I think I had them once as a kid when I visited a hospital." Anne gave a weak nod, poking her food listlessly. She didn't have much of an appetite, but still forced herself to eat a few bites. That, at least, was something she remembered from her past life: eat even a little to help your body fight off illness. Once Anne was done eating, she waited for Fanny to finish. They walked side by side toward the greenhouses for herbology class. On the way, they were stopped by Hermione. Hermione came running up to them, panting slightly, eyes full of concern. Anne looked worse than usual, her pale face tinged with an unhealthy flush, and her usually bright amber eyes looked dull and tired. "Hey!" Anne said quietly. "Hi, Hermione," Fanny greeted her. Are you looking for Anne? Hi, Fanny. Hermione caught her breath, then without hesitation, reached out and placed her hand on Anne's forehead. Anne didn't even flinch. I heard you had a cold. Hermione said anxiously. Oh, good. No fever. I brought these. She dug through her bag and pulled out several small square boxes. Cold medicine. My parents sent them with me. Anne's eyes lit up. Cold capsules. Antibiotics. Real medicine. She snatched the boxes with both hands and rasped excitedly, Hermione, you're amazing. Antibiotics. Your parents are geniuses. Hermione blushed and smiled shyly. I hope they help. Anne nodded eagerly. They'll help loads. Thank you so much. Anne was literally just moaning about wanting aspirin, Fanny added cheerfully. So this is perfect, especially since she won't drink pepper-up potion. Hermione smiled, then looked concerned again. Try to rest your voice, okay? You should head to class now, I need to get to mine too. The next day, Anne took the cold medicine and felt significantly better. It didn't completely cure her, but it soothed her sore throat and helped with the fatigue. Rain continued to fall throughout October, and by Halloween Eve, there was still no sign of it letting up. But the holiday brought with it a much-needed spark of joy. Hogwarts finally had something to celebrate. The Great Hall was decked out in full Halloween flair, live bats swooped through the air, and Hagrid's massive pumpkins had been carved into glowing jack-o'-lanterns and hung magically from the ceiling. Rumor had it that Dumbledore had even invited a skeleton dance troupe to perform for the students. Each house table was lined with towering pumpkin cream cakes, pies, scones, and every kind of pumpkin-based dish imaginable, but there were plenty of other delicious options too. Fred and George Weasley were selling prank masks and joke fireworks, and even the thunder rumbling outside couldn't dampen the festive mood. At the Slytherin table, Anne was happily stuffing her face. She tried every new dish: spaghetti bolognese, parmigiano cheese, salami, roast foie gras, seafood pizza, and onion soup, an unexpected spread of Italian cuisine. These house elves must have gotten their hands on a new cookbook. Anne said between bites, clearly impressed. Fanny, as always, ate politely and didn't speak with her mouth full. After swallowing a tender bite of grilled beef, she dabbed her lips and said, "Tell me honestly, Anne. Does this sudden menu change have anything to do with you?" Anne froze with a slice of pizza halfway to her mouth. After swallowing, she took a sip of mushroom soup and smiled. Well, maybe just a little something to do with me. Oh look! Dumbledore's band is here. The doors to the Great Hall opened, and in marched a band made entirely of skeletons, each draped in flamboyant, colorful robes. A student from a wizarding family gasped, "Wow! It's the famous skeleton ensemble." Halfway through the feast, Fanny noticed something odd. "Hey, where are the Gryffindor trio? They're not at their table." Anne glanced over without much concern. "If those three are off together, I'm not worried. They're probably off on another prelude to some grand adventure." The feast continued, full of music, food, and laughter. Anne was reaching for another helping when Fanny tugged her sleeve. "Anne, it's really late. If you eat any more, you'll end up sleeping through all of tomorrow's classes." Grumbling, Anne let Fanny pull her away. They lagged behind the crowd a little, but quickly caught up, only to find a massive group of students blocking a corridor. The hallway was packed. Anne tried pushing through to see what was going on but couldn't get far. So she stood with Fanny at the back of the crowd. Fanny stood on tiptoe to peer ahead. "Anne, I think there's a clear space up front, and some things hanging from a torch bracket on the wall. Let's just wait. We'll find out when we get back to the common room," Anne replied, rubbing her stomach. She had definitely eaten too much. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed from the front. "Enemies of the air, beware! You'll be next, Mudblood. Draco Malfoy." The crowd burst into a buzz of whispers and gasps. Fanny's face changed immediately. Her eyes flashed with anger. Malfoy? How could he say something like that? Who's he threatening? I can't believe he... What's going on here? What happened? Filch's voice screeched as he elbowed his way through the students, drawn by Malfoy's shout. Anne watched as he pushed to the front, followed closely by several teachers, Dumbledore, Snape, McGonagall, and Lockhart. Anne instinctively stepped aside to let them pass. When Filch reached the front, he let out a strangled cry. My cat! What happened to Mrs. Norris? Then his voice turned venomous. You, he shrieked. You killed her. You killed my cat. I'll kill you, I'll. Argus. Dumbledore's voice cut through the air, low and firm. He stepped past Harry, Ron, and Hermione and gently removed Mrs. Norris from the bracket. Come with me, Argus. Harry, Ron, Hermione, you too. Everyone else, return to your dormitories. Lockhart jumped forward. My office is closest, headmaster, just upstairs. You're welcome to. Thank you, Gilderoy, Dumbledore said calmly. The crowd parted in silence, watching them go. Lockhart followed with a pompous grin, trailed by Professors McGonagall and Snape. As Dumbledore passed Anne, he paused and looked down at her. Miss Reeve, he said gently, if you don't mind, would you fetch Madame Pomfrey for me? Anne, who had been absent-mindedly fiddling with her silver sicko coin, looked up in confusion. She'd been too absorbed in her thoughts about the original plotline to realize he was speaking to her. But Dumbledore didn't seem bothered. He repeated his request kindly, then added, please ask her to meet us in Professor Lockhart's office upstairs. Can I say I mind? Anne thought silently. But Fanny was already tugging at her sleeve, and everyone, the teachers, the trio, was now watching her. All right, headmaster. I'll go right away, she said quickly. Dumbledore nodded and moved on. But as he, the trio, and the teachers passed her, each of them cast Anne a curious glance. Once they were gone, the crowd broke out in a storm of whispers and speculation as students dispersed back to their dorms. Anne only had time to whisper to Fanny, wait for me in the common room, before sprinting off toward the hospital wing. A/N, yes, wizards can catch colds, this bit is inspired directly from the original books. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 29, Petrified. Anne ran as fast as she could to the infirmary to fetch Madame Pomfrey and led her straight to Professor Lockhart's office, which was easy to recognize. His smiling face beamed from a poster right on the door. When they arrived, Dumbledore was bent over, examining Mrs. Norris, who lay silently on a polished table. The trio sat stiffly in chairs in the corner, eyes immediately locking onto Anne as she entered. Snape lingered in the shadows, his expression cold and unreadable. Professor McGonagall stood by the fireplace, gently consoling a distraught Filch who was hunched over a desk, weeping. All around the room, enchanted portraits of Lockhart moved cheerfully, as if oblivious to the tension. Oh, Madame Pomfrey, please take a look at this poor cat. Dumbledore stepped aside. Thinking her job was done, Anne instinctively took a step back, ready to leave. But Dumbledore's gaze, sharp beneath his half-moon glasses, shifted toward her. Miss Reeve, he said gently, I'd like you to stay. We may have a few questions for you. Anne's heart skipped a beat. Her thoughts raced. What did he find out? How much does he know? Did something I did recently raise suspicion? She kept her expression calm, though her eyes flickered with faint confusion as she looked back at Dumbledore. He, however, had already returned his attention to the cat. Neither Professor McGonagall nor Snape objected to his decision. Lockhart chimed in with his usual dramatic flair. Surely there's no need to keep a second-year student here. I imagine she's terribly shaken and ought to be sent back to rest. I personally think Mrs. Norris is simply... She's not dead, Madame Pomfrey said firmly, straightening up and visibly relieved. She's been petrified. Lockhart immediately jumped in. Yes. Petrified. I thought so too, of course. Filch's wailing softened into sniffles. The word petrified struck Anne. Her mind flew back to the lesson where she'd used a basic petrification charm. Could that be it? No, that's impossible. Her magic was weak, she could barely freeze a house elf for a few seconds. Upper year students know the spell too. No, this must be the work of that serpent in the chamber. But why is Dumbledore keeping me here? Dumbledore quickly answered her unspoken question. Miss Reeve, do you happen to know when Professor Sprout's mandrakes will reach maturity? Anne relaxed. So that was it. She thought for a moment before replying, likely by the end of next term, around May, headmaster. I see. Dumbledore looked back at the cat thoughtfully. But who did this? This is no prank. Ask him. Filch suddenly shrieked, face blotchy with tears as he jabbed a trembling finger at Harry. A second-year student couldn't possibly do this, Dumbledore said firmly. It would require advanced dark magic. Anne stayed still, wondering if she should leave. Come on, headmaster. Say something. I don't want to be involved in whatever this is. Especially if it has anything to do with that snake. She glanced at Snape, hoping for a signal, but he ignored her, eyes fixed on the cat. McGonagall was focused entirely on the trio. He did it. I know it. Filch shouted again, his flabby face turning purple. He saw the note in my office. He knows I'm a squib. I didn't even touch Mrs. Norris. Harry protested loudly, anxiety written all over his face. And I don't even know what a squib is. Liar! Filch roared. He saw the letter, my quick spell correspondence course. Allow me to say something, headmaster, came Snape's voice from the shadows. Perhaps Mr. Potter and his friends were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still, some questions remain. Why were they even in that corridor? Why didn't they attend the Halloween feast? The trio launched into a rushed explanation. They'd gone to nearly Headless Nick's Death Day party. There were hundreds of ghosts who can confirm we were there. Then why not come to the feast afterward? Snape asked, eyes glinting in the candlelight. Why the upper corridor? Anne, Ron, and Hermione all turned to Harry. Because. Harry stammered. We were tired and wanted to go to bed early. No dinner. Snape's tone was silky. Ghost food doesn't strike me as very filling for the living. We weren't hungry, Ron added hastily, though his stomach betrayed him with a loud grumble. Snape's thin lip smile widened. My suggestion, headmaster, is that Mr. Potter isn't being entirely truthful. Perhaps he should lose a few privileges until he decides to be more forthcoming. Personally, I think suspending him from the Gryffindor Quidditch team might help him reflect. Honestly, Severus, McGonagall snapped, there's no reason to believe he's done anything wrong. The cat wasn't hit by a broomstick, and there's no evidence pointing to Potter. Dumbledore gave Harry a searching look. Until proven guilty, he is innocent, Severus. Snape looked thoroughly displeased. So my cat's just petrified. Filch howled, eyes bulging. I want to see someone punished. We will restore her, Argus, Dumbledore said calmly. Professor Sprout's mandrakes will be ready next term. With them, we can brew a restorative draft. Dumbledore glanced at Anne and the trio. That's enough for tonight. You may return to your dormitories. Anne wasted no time leaving Lockhart's office, but once on the stairs, she slowed. Her stomach hurt, it had started earlier but worsened after the rush. Shouldn't have eaten so much. She muttered. The trio spotted her walking slowly and assumed she'd waited for them. Ron caught up with a grin. "Anne, you're the best. Let's find an empty classroom, we've got to talk." "What about?" "Mrs. Norris, of course. Harry noticed something weird, and we need your help to figure it out." Ron replied as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Anne blinked, trying to keep up. "Weren't you all too tired to stay up? And if something strange happened, why not tell Dumbledore? Snape was there." Harry blurted. "He wouldn't have believed me." "This one," Hermione whispered, opening a classroom door and pulling Anne in. Ron and Harry slipped in behind her and closed it quietly. "Actually," Hermione began, Harry heard a voice. "That's why we were there." Harry nodded. "After the Death Day party, we were heading back to the feast when I heard this voice. I couldn't make out what it said, but I followed it, and then we found Mrs. Norris." "There was a puddle," Ron added. "I nearly slipped. On the wall, it said, 'The chamber has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware.'" Anne started to speak. But Harry rushed to say more. "I know it sounds crazy, Anne, but it's true. I didn't hurt Filch's cat, and I had no idea what a squib was." "What is a squib?" Hermione answered quickly. "A squib is someone born to a wizarding family but who can't use magic. It's the opposite of a muggle-born. They're quite rare, I read it in Magical Theory for Beginners." Anne took the opening. "Can I speak now?" All three turned to look at her. The room fell silent. "I believe you, Harry." Harry visibly relaxed. "But I don't know why this happened, or what the chamber really is. I don't have any answers right now. What I do know is that you all should get back to your dorms before Snape catches you again. That'd be much worse." "Right." Harry sighed, clearly hoping for more. Ron mumbled, "So what is in that chamber?" Hermione didn't push the issue. As they exited the classroom, she muttered, "The chamber. I feel like I've read about it somewhere." Back in the Slytherin common room, Anne was greeted by Fanny, Pansy, and several other students still awake, including Malfoy and his cronies, loitering in a corner. "Anne, what happened?" Fanny asked at once. "You were gone so long. Did Filch's cat really die?" Pansy added. Anne gave them a simple summary, leaving out anything that would stir gossip and downplaying her own involvement. She focused instead on Filch's outburst and Snape's interrogation. For the next few days, talk of Mrs. Norris's attack dominated every conversation. Fanny was so curious that she kept dragging Anne to the library, claiming she wanted to figure out what the Chamber of Secrets really was. Anne, meanwhile, spent more time in the greenhouses. After the incident, Professor Sprout doubled her efforts with the mandrakes, though the rest of the plants got a little less attention. On Tuesday, they had History of Magic with Gryffindor again. As usual, Fanny had to drag Anne into the dull classroom. Most of the students were already dozing off. Half an hour into Professor Binns's monotone lecture, something extraordinary happened. Hermione raised her hand. Fanny shook Anne awake. "Anne, wake up!" "Why?" Anne groaned, rubbing her eyes, only to see Hermione's hand raised high, unmistakable in the dim room. A jolt of alertness snapped her awake. What on earth is Hermione about to ask in History of Magic? Everyone stared at Hermione. Professor Binns looked startled. "You are Hermione Granger, sir? Could you tell us what you know about the Chamber of Secrets?" "This is a History of Magic class, Miss Granger. I deal with facts, not myths or legends." He cleared his throat and continued, "That October, a special task force was assembled by the warlocks of..." He trailed off. Hermione's hand was up again, waving eagerly. "Miss Granger. Well, sir, aren't most legends based on some truth?" Binns stared at her like he'd never looked at a student properly before. "I suppose you could say that. But this story is particularly sensational, borderline absurd. Still, everyone leaned in closer to hear. "Oh, very well," he said slowly. "Let's see. The Chamber of Secrets. You all know Hogwarts was founded over 1,000 years ago, though the exact date is uncertain, by four of the greatest witches and wizards of the age, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin." He paused, surveying the class with vague eyes. At first, the founders worked together harmoniously, gathering magical children from far and wide. But eventually, differences arose. Slytherin wanted to admit only students from pure-blood families, believing Muggle-borns were untrustworthy. Eventually, he argued with Gryffindor and left the school. "That's what the records tell us," he continued. "However, legend has it that Slytherin built a secret chamber within the castle, unknown to the other founders. According to the story, he sealed the chamber so only his true heir could open it, unleashing a horror within to cleanse the school of those he deemed unworthy to study magic." The class was dead silent, but not with sleep. Everyone was tense, riveted. "Of course," Binns said sharply, "this is all nonsense. The school has been searched many times, by the most learned witches and wizards. There's no such chamber. Just a tale to frighten the gullible." Hermione raised her hand again. "Professor, you said something terrifying was inside. What exactly is it?" "Some believe it's a monster that only Slytherin's heir can control." Nervous glances were exchanged. "I repeat, there is no monster. No chamber. It's all fiction." "But sir," said Seamus Finnegan, "if only Slytherin's heir can open it, maybe that's why no one else has found it." "Nonsense," Binns snapped. "Generations of headmasters." "Maybe it takes dark magic to open it," another student said. "Dark magic can be detected." Binns barked. "And if someone like Dumbledore can't? Maybe it has to be someone related to Slytherin," Dean Thomas suggested. "That's enough." Binns cut him off. "This is mythology, not history. I regret even bringing it up. Let's return to facts, real, proven facts." Within 5 minutes, the class had once again slipped into a sleepy haze. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 30, Conversations. As soon as History of Magic ended, Anne did what she always did, grabbed Fanny and dashed to the Great Hall for lunch. She didn't notice how the Gryffindors in class had all carefully avoided the Slytherins. At the Gryffindor table, the students were abuzz discussing what Professor Binns had said during class. The Slytherin table wasn't much different, except that Draco Malfoy was loudly boasting about how wise Salazar Slytherin's ideals were, insisting all Muggle-borns and foolish students should be expelled from Hogwarts. Fanny glanced cautiously along the length of the Slytherin table and asked in a low voice, "Anne, do you think the heir of Slytherin is really in our house? Who do you think it could be? Could it be Malfoy?" "Fanny, didn't Professor Binns say it was just a myth? You still believe in that?" Of course Anne couldn't tell her the truth. "But loads of people saw it the other day, the Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware. It was written on the wall. And now, after what Binns said in class." Fanny pressed. Anne grabbed a slice of bread. It could have just been someone pulling a prank after reading about it somewhere. But what about Mrs. Norris? She was petrified. Dumbledore said it had to be some very powerful dark magic. Fanny wasn't giving up. As Anne buttered her bread, she motioned subtly toward Malfoy. "Then why don't you go ask him about it tonight?" Fanny turned to glance at Malfoy, lowering her voice even more. "Anne, if he really is the heir, do you think he'd actually tell us?" Anne picked up another slice of bread to make a sandwich. "Probably not." Fanny's eyes sparkled as she leaned in again. "So what do we do? Should we do something, Anne?" Anne paused mid-bite and sighed. Fanny, you really should have been sorted into Gryffindor. Fanny tilted her head thoughtfully. Really? I do like Gryffindor, but both my parents were Slytherins. Come on, Anne, just tell me, are you planning something? Looking at her seriously, Anne replied, I'm not. I mean it. From a logical standpoint, this is a bad idea. The best course of action is to do nothing. Besides, most of my time spent in the greenhouses, you know how much Professor Sprout relies on me lately. Fine. Fanny looked a little dejected, then turned to her food and started eating. That afternoon after Transfiguration, Anne and Fanny returned to the Slytherin common room. Malfoy was at the center of the room, loudly bragging that he'd written to his father and would soon find out who the heir really was. When he did, he said, he'd help the heir get rid of Harry and his friends and kick them out of Hogwarts. Anne sank into an armchair near the fireplace, pulled out a massive herbology book, and said to Fanny, who had taken the seat across from her, see? You didn't even have to ask. Fanny glanced at Malfoy doubtfully. It's not him? Then who is it? Anne just shrugged and started flipping through her book. The next afternoon, Anne was in Greenhouse 1 with a fifth-year Hufflepuff named Ralph, collecting the juice of a magical plant under Professor Sprout's direction. Anne! Anne! Anne looked up and saw Hermione waving at her from the doorway, with Ron and Harry close behind. She gave Ralph an apologetic smile, and he nodded understandingly. Anne carefully capped the glass vial in her hand, placed it in a wooden box, removed her dragonhide gloves, and stepped outside. I knew I'd find you here, Hermione said cheerfully. You don't have class this afternoon. Anne returned the smile politely, but her heart sank. Definitely bad news. What's going on? Harry spoke first. We wanted to ask, do you think Malfoy might be the heir of Slytherin? Anne cut in, calm as ever. Well, last night in the common room, he was bragging about how he'd written to his father to find out who the heir is. Said once he finds out, he'll team up with them and kick you three out of Hogwarts. But this morning, he got a reply saying his father didn't know either, and told him not to get involved. Is that all? So Malfoy isn't the heir? Ron frowned, scratching his chin. But no one else hates Muggleborns as much as he does. Hermione looked thoughtful. But if he was the heir, would he really tell anyone? Harry turned to Anne. Anne, maybe we could. No, Anne cut him off coldly. Stop right there. We? No, I am me, and you are you. The daring Gryffindor trio can go hunt for the truth all they want, but don't drag me into it. For the record, I have no interest in getting involved in any adventure. And besides, I'm a Slytherin. She looked at the stunned trio. Anything else? No? Then I'm heading back in. Nobody said a word. Taking their silence as agreement, Anne turned and walked back into the greenhouse. Hermione stared after her, both disappointed and impressed. I figured she wouldn't help us, but this wasn't a total loss. What loss? She just told us Malfoy might be lying. Oh, and that she's a proud Slytherin. Guess the heir wouldn't target her, hey? Ron grumbled. But she also told us Malfoy has a letter from his dad, Hermione pointed out. If Malfoy really is the heir, that letter could be proof. And Ron, don't forget she helped cure your slug vomiting last time. Yeah, but why does she hate working with us so much? Ron muttered. That's the second time she's called us the daring trio. They started walking back toward the castle. Maybe she really doesn't like adventures, Harry said, kicking a pebble. After all, she is a Slytherin. So what now? I've already thought of another plan, Hermione said confidently. One that doesn't involve Anne. It might break 20 school rules, but, are you in? Of course. Why wouldn't I be? Ron replied without hesitation. In the library, at a square wooden table meant for 4, books on wizarding history were piled high. Anne sat behind the stack, scribbling away at her homework. The seat across from her was empty, except for a neatly placed sheet of parchment, an inkwell, and a quill. After a while, Fanny arrived with 3 thick books. She placed them neatly in the top corner of her parchment but didn't sit. Instead, she walked around the table and quietly pulled out the chair next to Anne. Noticing the movement, Anne paused and tilted her head slightly. "What's going on?" she asked softly. Fanny leaned in like she was about to share a secret. "I just saw Hermione, Ron, and Harry in the restricted section. They checked out a book, guess what it was?" Anne didn't even look up. Her quill kept moving. "Not interested." But Fanny whispered eagerly, "It was most potency potions. I was behind a bookshelf and saw it clearly." Hermione looked so excited when she got it. "But it's an advanced potions book, way beyond our year. And you need a professor's signature to borrow from the restricted section. What teacher would approve that for second years?" Anne didn't pause. "Fanny, I'd suggest you forget all about this. Don't get involved in the Gryffindor trio's adventures, okay? Remember, you're a Slytherin. By the way, have you finished Professor Bin's assignment yet?" Fanny slumped back with a pout. "Finished ages ago. Unlike you, I don't spend every day in the greenhouses. Pansy's always chasing after Malfoy, and the other 2 girls in our dorm keep saying classes are too hard. Honestly, everything's so boring. At least at home, I had Langer to play with." Anne still didn't look up. "Maybe you should find something you like doing. Read a book you enjoy. Or something you'd normally do to pass the time at home." Fanny thought for a second. "Back home I'd spend a lot of time on etiquette lessons, watch TV, go riding. Hogwarts doesn't even have TV. And the next Quidditch match isn't until next weekend. I'm sick of reading." Anne sighed while still writing. "You're right. And there aren't many Slytherin girls, either. Maybe try making friends from other houses." Fanny's eyes lit up. "Really?" But then it dimmed. "But, right now everyone thinks the heir is a Slytherin." "There must be someone who doesn't think that," Anne said calmly. "Why not find them?" There was a pause, then Fanny's voice piped up again. "Okay. I'll let you get back to your homework now," she said cheerfully. She stood, packed up her parchment and ink, grabbed her books, and trotted off to return them. Anne glanced up, watching her disappear down the rows. Still a child, she thought. Then again, maybe Hogwarts isn't the kindest place for kids this age. She looked down at the parchment in front of her and groaned inwardly. So much homework. A/N, I think by now everyone's figured out who Fanny is planning to befriend next. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 31, Quidditch. Ever since that conversation in the library, Anne noticed that Fanny had been spending more and more time outside the common room. Most nights, when Anne returned from the greenhouses, Fanny wasn't back yet, quite the change from her usual habit of reading in the common room. Her once neat robes often came back with damp hems. One night, just before bed, curiosity got the better of Anne. "Fanny, what have you been up to lately?" "Nothing much. We still go to class, eat and hang out together," came Fanny's muffled reply from under the covers. "Well, yes, that's true. But when I go to the greenhouses, where do you go? And how come you've been getting back even later than me the past few nights? You told me to find something I'm interested in, remember? I thought that was a good idea, so I did. As for what it is, I'm not telling. It's a secret." Fanny's voice was still muffled from under her blanket. That piqued Anne's interest. "A secret? Then?" Fanny interrupted quickly, her voice flustered. "Don't ask," Anne. You have your secrets too, right? So of course I can have mine. That's it. I'm going to sleep. All right then, sleep well. Good night. Anne thought to herself before drifting off, maybe she should have a proper talk with Fanny when they had time. But then again, it was perfectly normal for girls their age to have little secrets. Best to leave it alone for now. Her mind slowly slipped into sleep. After that, Fanny's odd behavior disappeared. When Anne returned to the dorms at night, Fanny was usually back in the common room reading again. Sometimes she even tutored the two other girls in their dorm, and Anne occasionally joined in. After all, not every child in the wizarding world was a prodigy. On Saturday morning, Fanny yanked Anne out of bed. The first match of the Quidditch House Cup this year was Gryffindor vs Slytherin. And the Slytherin team had a new player, Draco Malfoy. Come on, Anne, get up. Pansy and the others already left, and I brought you breakfast too. Fanny whipped open the heavy curtains surrounding Anne's four-poster bed. Ugh! Anne groaned and pulled the blanket over her head to block the light. Fanny's voice was full of excitement. You saw how Malfoy was bragging last night about his new broomstick, and said his dad bought it for him. Let's go see if he's really as amazing as he claims. Rubbing her eyes, Anne sat up and started getting dressed. If you already think he's full of hot air, then what's there to see? But the whole Slytherin team got new brooms this year. I want to see how Gryffindor plans to handle it. Pansy told me ages ago that it was Malfoy's dad who bought all those brooms, probably the only reason Malfoy made the team. Still half asleep, Anne pulled a jumper over her head. So you think Slytherin will win easily? Not necessarily. Gryffindor's been training really hard lately. Anne paused mid-brush in the bathroom. How would you know that? Of course I know. I've seen them. Fanny stopped herself halfway through the sentence, her expression suddenly sheepish. She quickly added, I mean, when we go back to the dorm after dinner, I've seen the Gryffindor team just arriving for theirs. Is that so? Anne wiped her face with a towel, then hung it up and stepped out of the bathroom. She smirked and teased, You haven't secretly taken a liking to one of the Gryffindor boys, have you? Is that why you've been sneaking out? Fanny's face turned crimson as she hastily denied it. Anne! What are you even saying? I was just. Don't worry, no need to explain, Anne laughed, wrapping a scarf around her neck. Humph! Fanny gave her an exaggerated glare and stomped off. Okay, I'm sorry, Fanny. Anne quickly grabbed her breakfast from the nightstand and chased after her. Note to self, she thought, girls this age are sensitive, don't push too far with teasing. At the Quidditch pitch, Anne and Fanny stood right at the front of the Slytherin stands, thanks to Fanny, who insisted on dragging her there as penance for Anne's teasing. Anne wasn't thrilled. The yelling from the stands came from every direction, surrounding her like a living wall of noise. Worst of all, she couldn't leave. Fanny, however, was clearly delighted. It's great watching Quidditch from up close, isn't it, Anne? She shouted into her ear. Anne had no choice but to nod. Fanny was too happy to mind. She turned toward the field as the players entered, and Madame Hooch instructed Flint and Wood to shake hands. Anne, seeing Fanny's attention shift, glanced up at the sky. Thick clouds were rolling in, and distant thunder rumbled. She silently hoped it wouldn't rain. On my whistle, Madame Hooch's voice rang out across the field. 3, 2, 1. The stadium erupted as 14 players shot into the leaden sky. Harry flew higher than anyone else, eyes narrowed, scanning for the golden snitch. Malfoy sped after him, circling him closely, clearly trying to show off the speed of his new broomstick. Suddenly, a heavy black bludger zoomed straight at Harry. He dodged it by a hair's breadth, feeling the wind from it ruffle his hair. That was close, Harry! George shouted as he streaked past, bat in hand, aiming to send the bludger at a Slytherin player. Anne saw George take a hard swing toward Malfoy, but the bludger abruptly changed direction and headed right back for Harry. Ha ha ha! Malfoy rose a little higher and hovered. Looks like that bludger's got it in for you, Scarhead. Harry didn't respond. He dived instead, narrowly avoiding another hit. George intercepted and sent it flying again, but the bludger curved back like a boomerang and homed in on Harry's head. Harry shot off toward the far end of the field, the bludger howling behind him. Fred appeared ahead and slammed it off course, but even then, it doubled back toward Harry again. In the stands, Fanny tugged on Anne's sleeve. Anne, look! The bludger keeps going after Harry. Where? Anne adjusted her binoculars, tracking from the goalposts to midair. She saw Harry weaving frantically, the black ball trailing closely behind him. Could someone have cursed it? Fanny asked, worried. Madam Hooch checks all the balls before every match, Anne replied. It's probably just targeting Harry. Bludgers are meant to knock players off their brooms. But they don't usually fixate on one player like this. Fanny insisted. Anne didn't respond. A moment later, she muttered under her breath, just my luck, it's actually starting to rain. She raised one hand to shield her head and tugged Fanny's sleeve with the other. Fanny! It's raining. Let's go back. What? Fanny shouted. Anne pointed up. It's raining. That's even better. It's rare to watch a match in the rain, it makes it more exciting. Fanny shouted back, eyes already on the pitch again. As if on cue, the crowd roared once more. Anne glanced around the Slytherin stands. Hardly anyone had brought an umbrella, and no one seemed to care about the rain. Instead, the excitement only intensified. The first drops were large, cool splashes on her robe. Then the rain thickened into a steady downpour. Anne gave up trying to shield herself, dropped her hand, and sighed inwardly. Fine. Let's call this youthful impulsiveness, just this once. As the rain poured harder, the score gap widened. Slytherin scores again. That brings it to 70-10, someone shouted, and the Slytherin stand erupted in cheers. But just then, Gryffindor called for a timeout. The stands buzzed with speculation. What's going on? Are they changing tactics? Fanny zoomed her binoculars. Anne, what do you think? Why are they pausing? Anne scanned the field. Not sure. Maybe they're talking about the bludger? It has been chasing their two best players non-stop. Just as she finished speaking, a whistle blew, the game resumed. Fanny immediately followed the Gryffindor players with her binoculars. Anne shifted her focus to the teacher's stand, curious to see Professor Snape's reaction. But he wasn't there, only Lockhart, under a large umbrella. That's odd, she thought. Why is he the only one there? Where are the others? Merlin's beard. Fanny's sudden exclamation jerked Anne's attention back to the field. She looked just in time to see Harry fall from his broom and crash hard into the ground, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle. That must hurt, Anne thought. Gasps echoed across the pitch. Lockhart rushed down from the stands. Students from the Gryffindor section, Hermione and Ron in the lead, ran down to the field too. Fanny grabbed Anne's arm, panic in her voice. That was awful, Anne. I saw it. The bludger smashed into Harry's arm, then he just charged at Malfoy and fell off his broom. Suddenly, the commentator's voice boomed, Merlin's beard, Harry's holding the golden snitch. Gryffindor wins. 160-70. The crowd froze in stunned silence. Then the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw stands erupted with cheers, Harry Potter! Harry Potter! Fanny clapped a hand over her mouth. That was amazing. Then she grabbed Anne's hand. We've got to go check on him. But by the time they reached the pitch, they were told Harry had already been taken to the hospital wing by Hermione and Ron. Oh well, Anne said, tugging on Fanny's arm. "They're gone, let's head back and dry off. You'll see them again soon anyway." She led a disappointed Fanny back toward the castle. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 32, Fanny's Secret. 2 days after the Quidditch match, a sudden wave of panic swept through the school. Colin Creevey, a first year in Gryffindor, had been attacked by the so-called heir of Slytherin and petrified. Rumors spread like wildfire. He was lying in the hospital wing, stiff as a corpse. First-year students everywhere began moving in tight groups, as though walking alone would make them the next target. Anne didn't react at all to the frenzy. She simply spent even more time in the greenhouses. Professor Dumbledore had instructed Professor Sprout to accelerate the maturation of the mandrakes, so a lot of magical plant care had been handed over to Anne and a few Hufflepuff students. On the second Monday of December, Fanny came into the Slytherin dormitory to wake Anne up as usual. "It's Monday, Anne. Get up, we've got charms with Professor Flitwick this morning." "Oh, and Momo brought you a letter, it's from your Uncle Aaron." Anne shot upright in bed. "What? He hasn't written to me in a month. Isn't he still in Africa studying magical creatures? Let me see." Fanny handed her the letter and stuffed Anne's breakfast into the backpack by her desk. "I put your breakfast in your bag. Looks like I won't have to drag you out of bed today. I'll wait for you in the common room." "MHM." Anne got up and began opening the letter as she headed for the bathroom to wash up. When she came down to the common room, Fanny noticed something off. Anne looked unhappy, her face expressionless and distant. "What's wrong?" Fanny asked. Anne sighed. "Aaron told me not to come home for Christmas. He said he's doing some magical restructuring in the basement, moving some of the creatures and expanding a few climate zones. I was planning to surprise him during the holidays." Fanny gasped. "What? You're not going home for Christmas?" "Nope." Anne took a big bite of her bread, swallowed, then gave Fanny a curious look. "Why do you sound more shocked than I am?" Fanny quickly composed herself and waved it off. "No reason, it's just that. I'm not going home either this Christmas. I thought I'd be spending it alone. But now that you're staying too, we can spend it together." Anne nodded. "That's not so bad then. Besides, something I've been working on is just about ready." "What is it?" Fanny asked, intrigued. "You'll find out soon enough." Anne smiled mischievously. Poor Aaron, she thought. He's missing out. I was planning to bring it home over the break, but oh well. That Monday evening, after dinner, Anne and Fanny split up at the Great Hall. Fanny walked at her usual pace through the corridor leading to the Slytherin common room, but when she passed a large pillar, she suddenly stopped and peeked around it, watching Anne's silhouette disappear out the front doors of the castle. Once Anne was out of sight, Fanny turned in the opposite direction and quietly made her way up to the third floor. As she approached, her steps grew cautious. She hugged the wall and tiptoed along, glancing around nervously, until she reached the entrance of a girl's bathroom. She pushed the door open and entered. The bathroom was old and dilapidated, clearly unused for some time. A faint white mist wafted from one of the stalls. Fanny quickly approached it and knocked once, paused, then knocked twice more. The stall door opened. The dividing wall between this and the neighboring stall had been removed. Inside stood Hermione. A cauldron sat on the closed toilet lid beside her, emitting wisps of pale green steam. "Fanny!" Hermione said excitedly. "Did you get the bicorn horn and African tree snake skin?" Fanny nodded and pulled a paper-wrapped parcel from her robe pocket. "It arrived this morning from home. Here. But I might have some bad news." Hermione's hands trembled as she took the package, almost dropping it. "Don't tell me. Anne found out." Fanny's face went pale. "No. Of course not. Don't scare yourself. It's just, she's not going home for Christmas. Her uncle wants her to stay at school. Hermione exhaled in relief. That's good. Still, we should go over the plan again, just in case we've missed anything. She carefully unwrapped the package and examined the contents before adding them to the cauldron. The potion inside gradually darkened to a deep green and stopped steaming. Hermione scooped out a spoonful to inspect, then stirred it again. She pulled out a worn book from her bag, Most Potenti Potions, and flipped to a bookmarked page. After reading for a moment, she beamed. Polyjuice potion will be ready in 2 weeks. Fanny's eyes sparkled as she gazed into the cauldron. That's wonderful, Hermione. You're amazing. Just then, another knock came at the stall door, one knock, pause, then 2 more. Fanny opened the door. Harry and Ron slipped in quickly. Thanks to the missing divider, the 2 stalls formed a large enough space for all 4 of them to stand comfortably. Hermione kept stirring. Fanny brought the last ingredients. In about 2 weeks, we'll finally have proof against Malfoy. Brilliant! Ron pumped his fist. Let's see how smug he is then. Fanny added, a bit nervously, but I do have one problem, and staying at school over Christmas. Her uncle is remodeling the basement at home. What? Harry and Ron said in unison. Hermione kept calm. It's all right. Let's go through the plan again to patch any potential issues. We've already got Polyjuice potion brewing, and all the rare ingredients. Fanny has hair samples from Pansy, Goyle, and Crabbe. She pointed at the boys. Harry, Ron, you'll turn into Goyle and Crabbe. I'll become Pansy. Fanny will lead us into the Slytherin common room. You 2 will sneak into the boys' dorm and search for Malfoy's correspondence. Fanny nodded. Originally, the only tricky part was that both Pansy and Malfoy are staying at school. But I can handle that. The night before the plan, I'll find an excuse to lure them up to the astronomy tower. It takes nearly an hour to get back from there to the Slytherin common room. That should buy us enough time. She grew more excited as she explained. But now the new problem is Anne. Hermione and I are fine, we often walk around together with Pansy. But if Goyle and Crabbe are suddenly with us and Anne spots us, we won't be able to explain that away. Ron rubbed his chin, trying to think, but didn't come up with anything. Harry spoke up, what if we split up into 2 groups? We can all meet here, drink the potion, and then Fanny gives Ron and me the password. You 2 go first, and we follow a little later. That way, even if Anne sees you, it won't look suspicious. Fanny's eyes lit up. That's a great idea. Hermione set down her stirring spoon and nodded thoughtfully. That should work. Still, something weighed on her mind. She hesitated for a moment, then said, speaking of Anne. Fanny, don't you think she has a right to know? Fanny flinched, but her tone was firm. Remember when I agreed to help you? I promised to keep this secret. Ron muttered under his breath, you and Anne are like opposites. We tried to recruit Anne and she wouldn't come. But Fanny jumped in on her own. And both of you are Slytherins. Hermione and Fanny both glared at him. Fanny quickly brushed it off and said cheerfully, yes, I'm a Slytherin, but that's only because both my parents were. They're always busy with work, and my grandmother was super strict. I used to play with Lang all the time growing up, he's a Gryffindor alumnus. So I actually really like Gryffindor too. And besides, I am curious. Who opened the chamber? Why? Who's the heir? And after what Malfoy said to Hermione last time, calling her a mudblood, ugh, if he is the heir, then of course I want to help catch him. Just like on TV, put all the bad guys behind bars. Her eyes gleamed with righteous determination. Ron scratched his head. What's TV? And what's a bar? Harry and Hermione launched into an explanation, while Fanny glanced at her watch, muttered about the time, and hurried off. A few days later, a notice appeared in the Slytherin common room. Due to recent security concerns, a dueling club will be held in the Great Hall tomorrow evening. Students interested in participating are encouraged to attend. Professors Lockhart and Snape will be leading the demonstration. That evening, as soon as Anne returned to the dorm, Fanny rushed over to her. "Anne! Let's go tomorrow night. Professor Lockhart and our head of house, it's going to be amazing." Anne's internal alarms started flashing at the mention of Lockhart. "Lockhart? Can I say no?" Fanny blinked. "Absolutely not." At 8 o'clock the next evening, Anne and Fanny arrived at the Great Hall. The long dining tables had been cleared away, replaced by a golden stage along one wall, lit by hundreds of floating candles. The ceiling had turned into a pitch-black velvet dome. The entire school seemed to be packed in, everyone clutching their wands and buzzing with excitement. After a while, Lockhart ascended the stage in a magenta robe, radiant as always. Beside him stood none other than Professor Snape, still in his usual black attire. Lockhart raised his hands. "Gather round, everyone." Fanny pulled Anne closer. "Can you all see me? Can you hear me?" "Excellent." Lockhart beamed. "Professor Dumbledore has allowed me to open this little dueling club, to teach you all how to protect yourselves in the same manner I've used countless times before. For more on that, refer to my published works." He grinned, then gestured toward Snape. "Let me introduce my assistant, Professor Snape, who tells me he knows a little about dueling. He's graciously agreed to help me demonstrate. Don't worry, I'll return your potions master unharmed." Anne muttered, not sure who's going to end up worse off. Fanny tugged her sleeve. The two professors bowed to each other, or rather, Lockhart made a showy, twirling bow while Snape barely nodded. They raised their wands like dueling swords. "On 3, Lockhart announced. "We cast our first spell. Of course, no fatal blows." Anne saw Snape's smile and thought, this should be fun. 1, 2, 3. Both wands whipped upward. "Expelliarmus!" Snape shouted. A flash of red light. Lockhart flew backward off the stage, slammed into the wall, and crumpled to the floor. The Slytherins cheered. Anne couldn't help but laugh, but stopped at Fanny's glare. She held back her grin, silently giving Snape a thumbs up in her heart. Lockhart staggered to his feet, his hair standing on end. "Just as you see, a simple disarming charm," he huffed. "Lost my wand? Nothing to fear." After tidying his hair, he announced, "Now, we'll pair you up. Professor Snape, would you assist me?" As they moved through the crowd assigning partners, Anne ended up across from Fanny. "Let's try this," Anne said, eyes gleaming. "You cast on me first, don't worry, your spell won't throw me across the room like Lockhart." Fanny hesitated but nodded. "All right. Ready? 1, 2. Anne braced herself, wand in hand. 3. Expelliarmus. Fanny's wand sparked faintly. Anne's wand jerked out of her grip and clattered to the floor. "Well done," Anne encouraged, picking it up. "Now it's my turn." "Ready?" Fanny nodded excitedly. Expelliarmus. Fanny's wand flew straight into Anne's hand. "Wow, Anne! That was amazing!" But the rest of the Great Hall wasn't as peaceful. All around them, chaos had broken out, thanks to Snape's matchups. Many students were brawling. Fanny spotted Hermione locked in a scuffle with Millicent Bulstrode and dragged Anne over. "Stop it!" Anne yelled. She pulled them apart, picked up Hermione's wand, and asked, "Are you okay?" Hermione flushed, expecting to be scolded, but Anne just looked concerned. She shook her head. Anne handed back the wand. "Next time, don't drop it. And never fight people who are bigger but dumber, you've got better weapons. Hermione blinked. You're not going to ask why we fought? Anne shrugged. Everyone's fighting. I'm guessing Snape said something to Millicent. Before Hermione could respond, Lockhart's voice boomed across the hall. Everyone turned. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon.com/crimson_lore. Chapter 33, Parseltongue. All right. Everyone, stop. Lockhart shouted from the center of the stage. Let's have a pair of students give a proper demonstration. No more brawling, please. Hermione tugged Anne over to a spot closer to the stage, and Fanny, having calmed Millicent down, quickly returned to Anne's side. Snape picked up where Lockhart left off, his tone rather too gleeful. Let Potter and Malfoy do the demonstration. I believe Mr. Malfoy won't mind, am I right? Malfoy leapt up onto the stage at once, chin raised, eyes locked on Harry. Of course. The question is whether Harry Potter dares. Naturally, Harry was fuming. He jumped onto the stage without a word, glaring daggers at Malfoy. All right, both duelists are on stage. Bow to each other, please. Etiquette is important, Lockhart said, flashing his signature smile. But Harry and Malfoy merely stared at each other, neither bowed. Lockhart laughed awkwardly, trying to play it off. Looks like they're eager to start. Very well then, clear the stage. He leapt down and shouted from below, 1, 2, 3, begin. Malfoy raised his wand in a flash. Serpensortia, he bellowed. There was a loud bang from the tip of his wand, and to everyone's horror, a long, black snake burst forth, landing heavily on the floor between the two boys. It reared its head, hissing, ready to strike. Screams erupted across the Great Hall as students scrambled away. Fanny and Hermione didn't scream, they simply grabbed Anne and pulled her back with them. Don't move, Potter, Snape said lazily, stepping forward. I'll handle this. I'll do it. Lockhart interrupted, raising his wand dramatically. He waved it at the snake, but there was another loud bang, and instead of disappearing, the snake shot a meter into the air and landed again, more furious than ever. It hissed viciously and slithered straight toward Justin Finch-Fletchley, rearing up with fangs bared. Harry didn't know why he did it, he wasn't even aware of making the decision. His legs simply moved on their own, and before he knew it, he was shouting at the snake, "Leave him alone!" Miraculously, the snake froze. It flopped onto the floor, eyes fixed on Harry. The fear began to fade from Harry's chest. He didn't know how he knew, but he was sure now, the snake wouldn't hurt anyone. He looked up at Justin, smiling, expecting confusion or maybe gratitude. Instead, Justin looked terrified, and furious. What kind of sick joke is this? He yelled, then turned and bolted from the hall before Harry could say a word. Snape stepped in and waved his wand, vanishing the snake in a puff of black smoke. He stared at Harry with an expression that Harry didn't like one bit, calculating and oddly satisfied. Around them, hushed whispers rippled through the crowd like an ominous tide. Then Harry felt a tug at his robes. Let's go, Ron whispered in his ear. Come on, now. Hermione and Fanny had both been frozen in place. Anne leaned toward Hermione and said softly, I think Harry might need your help right about now. Hermione blinked, then nodded quickly and rushed after Harry. Fanny only snapped out of her daze when Anne gently pulled her toward the Slytherin dorms. Her voice trembled slightly, Anne, did I hear that right? Harry, he's a Parselmouth. You heard correctly, Anne replied calmly. He was speaking to the snake. But Parseltongue is the mark of Salazar Slytherin, our house founder. If he built the Chamber of Secrets, then doesn't that mean Harry? Fanny's voice trailed off, filled with unease. As they walked through a drafty corridor, Anne pulled up her hood and tugged her scarf higher over her face. Her voice came muffled through the wool. If you're worried Harry might be the heir, then I can tell you, there's no need. Hey? Why not? Fanny mimicked Anne's actions and found it much warmer that way. Anne gave a light chuckle. Because the Gryffindor trio are the salt of the earth. They're the heroes of this world, after all. Fanny's muffled voice betrayed her delight. Anne, you've read the Bible? That's such a high compliment. If they heard you say that, I'm sure they'd be thrilled. I don't plan on telling them, Anne replied with a grin as she broke into a run. Come on, it's freezing. Ever since the incident, students stopped whispering about Slytherin House and instead began avoiding Harry, Ron, and Hermione as if they carried a contagious curse. And just when things had barely settled, another rumor exploded across the school. Did you hear? Justin Finch-Fletchley and Nearly Headless Nick were both petrified. And Harry was the one who found them. Peeves even made up a song about it. Of course I heard. McGonagall marched him straight to Dumbledore's office. Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. But, he didn't look like someone who'd do something like that. Anne and Fanny were walking to herbology class, and they couldn't help overhearing the gossip. Fanny was furious at first and argued with a few students, but after a couple of heated debates, she settled for angrily pretending not to hear them. After a while, the frustration got to her again. She turned to Anne and snapped, "Why didn't you help me just now? You were just praising Harry the other day. If you'd backed me up, I would have shut them down." Fanny, people will say whatever they want. You can't stop them. And even if I did back you up, that's just one voice, what about everyone else? Anne shrugged. Besides, it's all rumors. There's no evidence. Once the truth comes out, all this nonsense will disappear on its own. Thinking of what they were about to do tomorrow night, Fanny calmed down and nodded seriously. You're right. Let's wait for the truth to speak for itself. Anne didn't think much of her words, her mind was on something else entirely. She needed to check if that tree's fruit had ripened. Christmas was only 2 days away. If the fruit was ready, tomorrow night would be the perfect time to harvest it. Later that evening at dinner, Fanny pushed her steak around on her plate, barely eating. The plan was set for tonight, and now that the moment had come, nerves were kicking in. What if Anne wouldn't let her leave the dorm? What if Malfoy and Pansy didn't go to the astronomy tower? She glanced at the two across the table. Had they read the note she slipped them? It had been Hermione's idea. The note read, "Tonight at 8 p.m. Astronomy Tower. You've always wanted Harry out of Hogwarts, right? This time, I've got undeniable proof that'll get him expelled." Fanny reassured herself. Hermione is reliable. It'll work out. Lost in thought, she jumped slightly when Anne suddenly spoke. Hey, Fanny, go back to the dorm ahead of me later, okay? I need to check something in the greenhouse. Startled, Fanny dropped her fork and quickly wiped her mouth, trying to hide her nerves. Right. You just surprised me, that's all. You're going to the greenhouse again tonight? Yeah, there's something important I need to do, Anne said, reaching for a piece of chocolate pudding. After dinner, Anne waved goodbye to Fanny at the entrance and ran off toward the Hogwarts gates. Fanny watched her disappear, then checked her watch, 7:40. She quietly slipped back into the Great Hall just in time to see Malfoy and Pansy whispering to each other, glancing around, and then hurrying off together. Pretending to look for something, Fanny followed them a few steps and confirmed they were heading toward the astronomy tower. Perfect. She spun on her heel and sprinted to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom on the 3rd floor. The moment she burst in, Harry and Ron looked at her anxiously. Fanny broke into a grin, her voice tinged with excitement. They're gone, headed to the tower. And even better, Anne went to the greenhouse. Brilliant! Ron exclaimed, practically bouncing in place. Harry was relieved. Things were going their way tonight. Hermione's voice came from inside the stall, bad news though, the potion still needs 10 more minutes. Fanny checked her watch. That's fine. It's only just past 7:50. Even if Malfoy and Pansy are there, they'll definitely wait half an hour. They won't risk leaving before they're sure Harry gets expelled. And when they try to come back, Filch has been hanging around the astronomy tower a lot lately. Ron chuckled darkly. That's karma. Ever since Mrs. Norris got petrified, Filch has been all over us. Maybe Malfoy will get a taste of it now. They all laughed. Then Fanny turned serious. All right, here's the password to Slytherin's common room, pure blood. Harry frowned. Seriously? That's the password? Before anyone could comment further, Hermione emerged from the stall with a cauldron. Polyjuice potions ready. I think we should drink it outside the stall and then change inside. Harry. I've got the clothes, Harry said, holding up a bag. Ron and I nicked them from the laundry room. And here's the hair. Fanny pulled 3 tiny glass vials from her pocket, each labeled carefully with a name. Hermione poured the potion into 3 cups and added the hairs. Hers turned inky black, Harry's became a muddy yellow, and Ron's a deep brown. Fanny wrinkled her nose. Ugh, those look disgusting. I bet they taste worse. The 3 of them grimaced at the bubbling mixtures, but no one backed out. With one final breath, they drank the potions in one gulp and rushed into separate stalls with their robes. Outside, Fanny paced nervously. The first door opened, it was Harry, tugging awkwardly at his oversized clothes. Fanny rushed over, eyes wide. Oh wow! Harry, you look exactly like Goyle. Harry frowned. But I feel weird. Your voice is different too. Honestly, if I hadn't seen you go in myself, I'd swear you were Goyle. Oh, wait, your glasses. Take them off. Harry did as she said. Fanny nodded, satisfied. Next, Ron and Hermione stepped out at the same time. Ron burst out laughing. Hermione, you really look like Pansy. Fanny ran over, scanning her up and down. Perfect. Okay, enough chatter, we need to go. It's 8:06, and it takes 10 minutes to get to our common room from here. The 4 of them dashed out of Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, ready for their mission. A/N, the phrase salt of the earth comes from the Bible, specifically Matthew 5:13. It's a high praise used by Jesus to describe his disciples. I really like this phrase, so I used it here. If you're enjoying the journey so far and want to read ahead, you can check out 25+ advanced chapters on Patreon, patreon/crimson_lore.